we've had the very, very good fortune over the past couple of years of having HNTB as a close partner, and they are this year's CoMotion Miami leadership partner. And they've been just an amazing partner to have. They're obviously one of the preeminent engineering firms in the world and are playing a critically important role as American cities and states rebuild, build, modernize airports, roads, highways, etc. Mike Inabinet, my friend, is the head of HNTB's key central region, but perhaps more significantly, he leads on a national level the Digital Infrastructure Solutions Group, which advises infrastructure owners around the country on ways to integrate new technologies into what they're doing. So without further ado, Mike, please come to the stage. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, John. I remember coming to CoMotion for the first time. I've come ever since. Beth Keegle, one of my colleagues here, who many of us know, said, come to CoMotion. And I'm curious, who's here for the first time at their first CoMotion? That's a big group. And I remember what it felt like to come here. It was very different than a traditional transportation conference that you might go to or something else that you would find in your industry. I showed up, there were EV tolls, there were simulation booths for air traffic control systems, for drones. There were these innovation contests and investors here thinking about what the next big idea. There were electric bikes that you could ride out in the parking lot. That got a little dangerous, but that was lots of fun. And it really took me outside of my box and took me outside of my comfort zone. I hope all of you are experienced what I experience every time I'm here, and that is a change in your thinking, a change in perspective. And that's a bit of what I want to explore with you this morning. If we're going to think about integrating innovation or collaborating and harnessing that collaboration for the benefit of what we do, the only way we're going to do it is if we change our perspective, because our world is changing around us. So I also am curious about when I showed up here at CoMotion for the first time, it felt very private sector heavy. There were a lot of inventors, a lot of creators, and I see that. How many of you would identify in that space of a creator or developer of software? All right, so, and I know the number is bigger than the hands being shown of the folks that will be here with us today. And how many in the public sector that you're working with? I don't know what the rest of you do, but in one way or another, we're serving either the private space or in the public space. And that mix is absolutely essential. I want to take us into the landscape of what we've been seeing over the last several years. And I think for me, I've been doing this 35 years. It has changed dramatically. And let's just look at the last few years and how that's changed dramatically. We had Secretary Trottenberg here yesterday. You've seen a huge shift in federal funding. That money wasn't always there. It was there when we built the highway system. The highway system was really built as a defense mechanism for the U.S., if you don't know that history. It has now become the economic engine. So it's really serving in a different way, and it's aging. It's 65, 70 years old in some places. And so we are finding ourselves having to rebuild that. So we're all very grateful for the infrastructure bill that allowed us to have more funding into that. But before that was available, back in the 2010s, I remember seeing a real challenge that we had in the U.S. There was not enough federal money. We were pushing to have that federal money, and we were not anywhere close. So what happened? Well, states had developed another mechanism. They did that through increasing gas tax, if they could do that in their state. They did that by looking for other ways to be creative. Some states had to look at P3s. The trick with the P3, though, is a financing mechanism. And eventually, you have to fund and pay back those loans. So we're constantly having to work in this circumstance where there's not enough money to do what we want to do. So cities then have jumped in. Over the past decade, the amount of measures that are out there, LA has one, it's called Measure M. It will fund itself for perpetuity. okay? But that money won't be there. There'll just be that funding mechanism. We have to continue to seed it. And transit has seen a huge increase, and aviation has seen a huge increase. Here's the other thing that I've noticed. Economic development is huge. I mean, look at the number of companies reshoring. So what is reshoring? We saw this during COVID. We were dependent on other countries and shipping for the vitality of our goods and services. So a lot of manufacturers have moved back to the U.S. And you can see that in EV charging locations where throughout the Southeast, there is a huge increase of manufacturing facilities. Auto manufacturers are changing. The EV tolls that you've seen here today, that's all changing. So this all needs to drive economic development. And another thing I heard here yesterday, I didn't expect to hear it, the impact on housing and jobs. Like, I know the jobs need to be there, but how is this integrating into our community? So that's more than just economic development, that's community vitality. And we've heard the voices that have come out stronger than ever, and we're seeing this through our state and federal and city agencies, that the community is way more integrated. Okay, we're smart folks in the room. We're gonna find a way to design it. And we don't want anybody to think that's easy, okay, because it's not. But the hard part of what we have to face is how do we integrate this into consumer. When I showed up here, I saw that EV toll. Before I showed up, I was like, no way am I getting in that EV toll. Now I'm waiting for it because I am tired of being stuck in traffic. So we are changing our mindset. The last thing I'll mention in the landscape is transit-oriented development. So if you're not familiar with Brightline, right here in Miami, connecting up through into Orlando, and eventually we'll go over to Tampa. And then now they are building from LA to Las Vegas. They have just made an announcement around that. Huge driver of transit-oriented development. That project's not just about movement of a high-speed train. I mean, that's really important. It's a great ride. It's a great experience. But that project is all about building in Miami. And I remember working here 15 years ago, and this downtown area was not like it is today. Okay, it was not necessarily a place that you felt safe walking at night or necessarily moving your business here. So transportation is a big driver around that. Innovation is changing rapidly, and it's changing everywhere we live. Miami-Dade County, I'm impressed by the energy that they've always put in this space. We had a conversation, CoMotion here a few years ago. We had an advanced air mobility working group. Well, that working group went countywide. Then that working group went statewide. And that's going to continue to work at a national level. We're going to see what's going on in Europe. How do they lay that platform? I'm interested to see those flying in 2025. That's going to be really interesting, and it's going to lay the platform for how things work in the U.S. Eileen Bouclé had a workshop on that yesterday, if you were able to attend. Goods movement is another huge driver. So how do we move goods around? And how does security work on goods? Well, it's coming out of the ports. We can't move it fast enough. If you look out the hotel window or just over across the channel here, you're going to see a stack of containers. How do we move those around? How do we get those through where they need to be? So those are critical things that we're looking at. And it's changing our landscape as well. We're at a perfect storm. But I want to talk about what we can do. But before I do that, let's explore what we saw yesterday. We talked about advanced air mobility. We talked about, we have a lot of folks here from the highway or transit sector. Will Reed was commenting this morning. He's a DOT agency. He's now having to take on transit. That's a change for them. Everything is multimodal. Everything. Moving from an airport to where you are, now you have Uber. How does that change the landscape? How do we have first and last mile? How do we design our cities? If you have a vertiport, think about it. We've designed our highways to get ourselves from our home or our city to the airport. Now, if a vertiport comes into the city, that reverses everything. And you have to change the flight paths. You can't just take an old helicopter pad and convert it to a vertiport. There's a lot of other things that have to change, a lot of security. So that's changing us. And emerging technologies is changing how we build infrastructure. So here's a cool story I like sharing. The Tappan Zee Bridge up in New York. So HNTB had the opportunity of being the program manager over that. And when we built that facility, we put sensors on the structure. So this is a pretty sensitive topic. What a barge hit that bridge, and we saw what happened up in Maryland. very unfortunate. But when a barge hit the bridge of new infrastructure at the Tappan Zee, it withstood the impact. But one of our engineers went to the chief engineer for the bridge. He said, "Do you want to know how your bridge reacted last night? If a bridge could speak, what would your bridge say?" And he said, "Absolutely, I want to know that." And he pulled out his data, and he showed him, and he said, "Your bridge is fine. This is exactly what happened. The acoustic sensors, all the other sensors were able to communicate immediately that morning how that bridge reacted." So we have to think about how we're going to design our infrastructure for the future and how that's going to impact how we are doing that. So that's really going to be cool and important. So today we are going to think about how in all the sessions you're going to hear more about intermobility, you're going to hear about cooperation, you're going to hear about partnership. This is, John, this feels like a different, I was saying that to you, it just feels different here. And I think the fact that we have a lot of private and a lot of public sector folks here trying to figure out, every session's talked about partnership. But what does it mean to have a partnership? Well, this is how I look at it. When we're looking to really understand and do a project, at HNTB we look at it this way. We have to discover what our clients value. It's not necessarily what we want to do. It's not what we want to do at all. It's not necessarily what we think is best, because I talked about how the community is going to react. It's what's needed. So what happens when you work for a public agency? What is your world like? Think about that for a minute. Regardless of who is in office, they have to maintain that infrastructure. They have to provide safety, reliable, sustainable infrastructure to the moving public. And that's what they hear about it. That's their job, number one. And, I started talking about the funding because there is not enough money. Across the board, if you've got good infrastructure, you're at a C rating. A lot of places are at a D rating. And, we're not going to live in a world where we get to an A. We probably won't live in a world where we get to a B. So we have to prioritize what we're going to do. That is the responsibility of DOTs or cities or federal agencies. And you heard the Secretary talk about it yesterday. That is a really hard job. It's a thankless job. It's not appreciated. So I want to share that mindset for you because it's really important. When I talk to our executive owners and I ask them, what is it when these technology companies, when these vendors, when they come to you, what is that like? They said they are absolutely overwhelmed because folks show up and they say, "This is what I can do for you," but they don't understand what I'm trying to do. They don't understand my values. They don't understand my value set. So this is something we're all going to have to do better. And they are living in the eyes of what the community wants. So my advice to all of us here representing the development or the innovation, that's where you need to start. Start there. Go ask that owner, what are you trying to accomplish? What are your priorities? What is important to you? And you're going to have a much better conversation. If you're in the public sector, these people are spending a lot of money that we don't have to invest in this space, in these technologies. And the first time doesn't necessarily work. I can't imagine the anxiety of having to continue that workforce, to continue to innovate in that space. They put their blood, sweat, and tears into this. They want to be heard. They're excited about changing the world. They want life-changing responsibility. So we need to appreciate that. So it's a shared conversation, and we all need to change our mindset. And I think that's really what I want to encourage all of us to do. There are rules of the road that we need to follow, okay? And we're not going to be able to change that. That would be against public responsibility. But we're going to have to change our mindset. And DOTs are not built for that. State, federal government is not built for that. Cities are not built for that. The ports aren't necessarily built for that. They're not built for rapid change. They're built for sustainability. So have patience. We have a big day in front of us. There is no question in my mind that we have a shared vision. That is clear in everything we do. We don't necessarily have a shared path. So let's continue to explore how we find that shared path and take the steps, have patience. I'm really excited about how this is all shaping. Just in the last 3 years that I've been attending, John, major things have happened. These announcements I heard yesterday is coming. I'm excited about it. So let's focus on discovering and finding ways to balance the testing of ideas and establishing the framework, and have a great CoMotion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you, HNTB, for your support and for giving us a clear idea of what you mean by partnership, and we're so happy to be partnering with you. And now I'm also really delighted to welcome on stage a real CoMotion friend that started this partnership, Beth Kegel, Vice President at HNTB, who will be moderating the next panel, Crossroads or Convergence, Intermodal Transport and Efficiency for both Goods and People. Beth, over to you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I am thrilled to be here at yet another CoMotion. My first CoMotion was in LA in 2019, November of 2019, and it's just been a great partnership and evolution together with CoMotion, so very excited to be moderating this morning's panel. As the title suggests, we are going to explore the benefits and challenges related to intermodal transportation of people and goods, including enhanced efficiencies. I always like to start with just a few statistics, and believe me, this is not a comprehensive set of statistics, but these are just a few to get us thinking a little bit. So when we talk about improving efficiency, here are a couple of measures that we think about when it comes to mobility. The reduction in travel time, and the reduction in costs. So here are some congestion statistics for the US. Traffic congestion and the associated delays cost the economy over $120 billion annually. In 2022, the average driver lost 51 hours in traffic. And I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at Miami. In the same year, Miami jumped to being the 9th most congested city in the world, 5th in the US, with the average driver losing 105 hours in traffic that year, and that was a 30% increase over pre-pandemic levels. I mean, pretty incredible. In 2021, the national cost of congestion to the trucking industry was nearly $95 billion. So we also heard from Chris from Port of Miami this morning, and he talked about how the cost of congestion for truckers that are trying to make 2 trips into the port, what that does not only to the trucking industry, but to the economy. So of course, when we look at transportation options, we also look at opportunities to enhance quality of life. Providing affordable access and options for a complete trip, in this case, from origin to destination, is one area. Reduced emissions is another area. And ensuring that people receive the goods that they need when they need them. So perhaps in providing options for seamless intermodal transportation, we have the opportunity to combine the strengths of the various modes to improve upon all of this. So I'm delighted this morning to introduce our panelists. I'm going to introduce them very briefly because I'm going to hand it over to them to do a more broader introduction of themselves and their organizations. First to my left, we have Mayor Jenny Arndt of the city of Fort Collins, Colorado, and I think you've probably heard all of these speakers so far. Next we have Julie White, who is Deputy Secretary for Multimodal Transportation from North Carolina DOT. Next we have Jennifer Jacob Dungs, who's the Global Head of Mobility for EIT InnoEnergy. And then we have Allison Dane Camden, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Multimodal Freight Infrastructure and Policy with USDOT. So with that, I'm going to take my seat. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and then we're going to have a great conversation, and we'll open it up to the audience after that. Okay. Mayor, you start.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much. Nice to be here. Just briefly, as my role in mayor, what it relates to this panel is I am vice chair of our public power authority that serves Northern Colorado region, and I'm also service chair of our regional airport. So those 2 positions, in addition to all the other mayor stuff, is what is going to be informing my comments today. So thank you for having me.
Julie White, North Carolina DOT. Thanks so much, Beth, for inviting me to be a part of this really great panel and to discover CoMotion. It's been absolutely spectacular so far. Been at DOT for 7 years. Before that, worked for the North Carolina Metro Mayors Association, representing large city mayors in transportation, economic development, and land use. And so coming to a DOT is a really fun place to take that background and knowledge. I spent 10 years listening to big city mayors lament a DOT that wasn't as innovative and as multimodal as they wanted their cities to be. And now I get to come into the DOT that laments all those crazy cities and all those crazy multimodal things they want to do and try and build bridges. So the theme of partnership that we've heard throughout, that's the key to everything we're trying to do now, is how do we partner with those cities so that we can achieve everyone's goals.
Hi, welcome from my side. I'm Jennifer Dungs. I come from EIT InnoEnergy. We're one of the leading climate tech investors. We're investing in hardware and infrastructure, so we have different verticals such as energy storage or renewables. I'm responsible for all the investments we do globally in the area of mobility. We've been really active in last mile, especially urban mobility in the last 2.5 years, so I'm really excited to kind of talk about that topic. And my background is, before that I spent over 20 years at the car companies. So it's been a big shift. I worked both in Detroit and also at the car companies in Germany. And it's a big shift to get the mindset change, what we heard about a little bit from Mike. So thank you.
Is my mic? I just wasn't speaking into it correctly. Okay, good morning. Allison, Dane, Camden with USDOT. I am leading our new, very brand new, created in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Office of Multimodal Freight Infrastructure and Policy. This is my absolute worst title yet. I just feel like in government, you just go from long title to long title. Brand new office created in IIJA, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, whichever you prefer to call it, focused on really putting a spotlight on freight. We're in the office of a secretary, and the way I see it is we're knitting together the good work that is happening in our modal administration, so Federal Highways, Maritime Administration, Federal Motor Carrier, Federal Railroad, they're all doing great work in the freight space, and it's my small but mighty team's job to knit it together, really focus on supply chains and make sure that people can get the things that they need when they need them. Before coming to DOT, I've only been, let's see, I came on board in September. Before that, I spent about 12 years at the Washington State DOT, and before that, I spent a decade on Capitol Hill. So I keep bouncing back and forth between the two coasts, but I'm a native Washingtonian of Washington State, the correct Washington. And I'm so excited to be here and be a part of this conversation with these powerhouse women. What a great way to start the day. Thank you.
Allison, you kind of stole my thunder because as I was looking down the panel, I don't think I have ever moderated a panel of all women and executive leadership within transportation. So that's pretty incredible. Thank you, CoMotion. I almost think we have to add a gentleman to add diversity to our panel now. Well, let's talk a little bit about defining the ecosystem and associated outcomes. There's been a lot of conversation around CoMotion about outcomes, and Mike touched on that. That's what we're really all here for, is driving positive outcomes. So you all play different roles as it pertains to delivering services in this world of multimodal transport. So could you share what the mobility ecosystem looks like to you and your organization, as well as the goals or desired outcomes you're looking to achieve? And Allison, if you could maybe kick this off, that would be great.
Yeah, happy to. So when I got to DOT, they kept calling it the freight office, and it's the multimodal freight office. And I think that multimodal piece of our title is super important because freight moves on every mode, whether it's highways, railways, waterways, ports, airports, drones, planes, biking, e-cargo bikes, walking, like that last, half mile, quarter mile. So to me, that multimodal piece of the office title is super important because I'm working with every component of DOT. I'm working with state DOTs. I'm trying to get in with local governments, but I have a small team and I haven't been here long enough. And so I really think just from that supply chain perspective, we are really focused on all of the ways freight moves so that folks can get the things that they need. I also think a lot about the multimodal freight network and those who are impacted by it, those who have traditionally lived along our highways, near railways, near ports, and the disproportionate burden they they bear the brunt of if living next to those facilities. They're not necessarily getting the advantage of them, but they're breathing in the air, they're dealing with the noise, they're suffering the consequences of it. So when I think about our multimodal freight system, I think about those that are impacted. I think about the way we all need each of those modes to work together well so we can get the things that they need, that we need. I think we all saw in 21 and 22 with the supply chain crisis where, you had a breakdown across the chain internationally and domestically. And, we really need to be, working together, all levels of government, public and private sector, to make sure things are working smoothly, efficiently, keeping our costs down. And I'm looking forward to talking more about some of our initiatives as we get into the discussion.
Who else would like to weigh in? Anyone?
I'll jump in. So DOTs, I think I heard Will Reed at Tennessee DOT talk earlier today in the earlier panel about sort of that's the way we've always done things. DOTs are kind of famous for that. We are really reticent to change. We're super bureaucratic. We're really big. And so when I came in, it was a really great opportunity to recognize that we were super siloed in the DOT. For example, our bike and pedestrian division did not talk to our public transit division. And it's one of my favorite stories about transportation. I was sitting at a stoplight on a 4-lane arterial 45 mile an hour, and I watched a bus pull up and stop at a transit stop, and by that I mean a sign in some dirt on the side of a road. And a mother got off the bus, and she had the stroller in one hand, she had the toddler in the other hand, she had the baby bag on her back. She got off onto that dirt, and this is not at a corner, of course. She immediately turned around and waited to cross mid-block. And I looked over and thought, well, there's the apartments, and there's her stop. So, right, she's not going to walk out of her way to a crosswalk to come back, but this is in no way a safe place for her to cross. And I sat there and lamented it and thought, what a shame that somebody hadn't done something about that. And then it was like my aha moment. I had just started in this job. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in charge of that. Like, I can do something about that. And so I came back and looked at my O chart, because I think how we organize is how then we create solutions. And so 7 years ago, we combined bike and pedestrian with public transit, and now we do multimodal planning, right? So now my bike and ped planners are working with my public transit planners to plan a system that makes sense, and that unlocked all kinds of new FTA dollars, because you can use FTA money within a half mile of a transit stop on the last mile, the sidewalks and the walking and all that. So actually through that synergy, we're taking the same money and we're making it go further, and we're planning better. And so for me, it's what is the problem we're trying to solve? And what is the ecosystem we want to see? What's the outcome we're looking for? And that's a really easy way to move from point A to point B across whatever mode you need to move across in a seamless and integrated way.
Maybe I could just add another perspective from the investor side. So I think when we look at new innovations that are linked to multimodal transportation, one of the things we're looking at is utilization, because at the end of the day, we have to have sustainable business models. And so when we look at the new designs that are coming out, if you're talking about infrastructure, then the infrastructure should serve both movement of goods and movement of people. When we look at new, vehicle modes or form factors, it's like, okay, how can that be leveraged when we need to move more goods or when we need to move more people? So really utilizing the new innovations to automatically serve a bigger group, and that then hits the bottom line. And one of the topics I think we might touch on later today, though, is the micro hubs. And that's where we're really pushing that these hubs shouldn't just be for people or goods alone, but then if you can utilize the same services, like a bike repair service that fixes the e-cargo bikes but also serves the community's bikes, then you create completely new business models that I think helps to keep these silos at bay.
Great, thank you very much. Let's delve a little bit deeper on efficiency. I mentioned a couple of statistics. I said those aren't comprehensive. They're just examples of things that we might look at to improve efficiency. And as I mentioned before, at the end of the day, we're looking to achieve those desired outcomes that each of us have for those that we serve. So in delving a little bit deeper, I just want to mention that I actually had a great discussion with each of these panelists, each of you, separately prior to today. And I learned that when you each look at efficiency, you come at it maybe with a little bit of a different lens from one another. So when you look at opportunities to enhance efficiency, what does that mean to you, and where do you focus? So, Jennifer, maybe you could start.
Okay, so maybe I give you a little context. A couple years ago, we looked at last mile logistics. You know, the numbers are increasing exponentially year over year. We have more B2C goods, and this problem isn't getting any easier as we grow in population and our GDP grows. So we wrote a study on the CO2 impact of using e-cargo bikes and electric vehicles, et cetera, and we also looked at the congestion impacts. Long story short, no one cared. Yeah, so yes, okay, it would have that impact. So in the last 2 years, we decided to collect real-world data from e-cargo bikes, e-mopeds that are in the field with one of the biggest logistics players in the world. And we said, okay, let's pilot this and see what are the cost savings and the efficiency savings. And we looked all the way upstream because this process starts not in the last mile, but way before you even get to the city hub. So you have to start at the edge of the city, then you need to build new hubs inside the city. These are all additional costs, and you have a lot of extra personal costs because you need to do a lot of extra sorting. So by the end of the study, and we just published it about 1 month ago, for a logistics company that we looked at in Europe that serves about 2 billion parcels a year, even with all the upstream costs, they could save over 100 million euros per year already today, adding just a small percentage of e-cargo bikes, so not converting their whole fleet. And when you go to 2030 with the congestion charges, parking fines, et cetera, those numbers go up to $500 million easily. And so that was the narrative we needed to take, not to win over the cities, but to win over UPS, right? To say, hey, you guys need to be paying attention to this because of these reasons and show them really the economics behind it.
Let me ask you as a follow-up, and then, of course, I want to hear from our other panelists about efficiency. Jennifer, one of the things we talked about, you invest in companies, and you were talking about efficiencies within those particular solutions that you are investing in itself, whether it's the efficiency of a bike or some other modality. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think in order to, again, our mindset is that this needs to be commercially viable, right? So in order for it to succeed, so it needs to be sustainable, like from a CO2 perspective, but commercially viable. And so when we look at that, we're looking at what is the efficiency of a cargo bike to replace a van. What are new innovations related to passenger cars that can increase the efficiency? And this is just one line item on this. We found a really interesting company from Slovenia who is using their in-wheel motors in some of the most innovative US new automakers like Aptera, Lordstown, which will convert into something else. And the efficiency that you can get by putting the motor inside the wheel of the car instead of in the center can increase the efficiency significantly. And these are the next topics, because I just end with this point. Like, what keeps me up at night is that if all we do is transform combustion engines to electric vehicles, we didn't do anything for transport and mobility. And that's like, this is the time when you need to flip your fleet, UPS, from combustion engines to electric. Please, dear God, look at other solutions that can make your fleet more efficient and save you cost. So it's really the biggest opportunity we have in mobility, and I hope we don't miss the boat, speaking of freight.
A great call to action. Mayor, would you like to add?
Sure. Thank you so much. It's taking off on the points made this morning about collaboration relationships. I'm going to just give you two real-world examples, and from a city perspective, in relation to efficiency. If you don't have your zoning and housing policies correctly, the people who work in your city can't live there. That's inefficient, and that impacts your roads. So that's one point about we can have a lot of, I love engineers, and absolutely they can figure it all out, but the social aspect of this can really thwart a really great engineering plan. So last night I was on the phone for an hour with our city manager and the chair of the school board, because our school district is the size of Rhode Island, and our city is the biggest municipality in the school district. And it seems like they're not all on board with our little transit plan, right? because they're going to start closing schools, consolidating schools. What does that do to a community if you have another elected board making decisions that aren't in sync with your plan, or your plan's not in sync with their plan? So these ideas of getting outside of your silos, even if you get better intergovernmental collaboration, you can really either promote your efficiencies or you can really mess them up, right? So one of my top priorities as mayor is safe routes to schools. I can't think of anything more important than getting all the kids to school safely in bikes and walking, and you're just growing a whole generation of people who are used to traveling that way. And then the school district comes in and says, we're going to close and consolidate 4 schools in your city. So just as an example of the importance of relationships, collaboration, and being in sync really is part of the efficiency discussion.
Mayor, I'm going to do a tick off on that. That was exactly what I was thinking about. And efficiency, I think it really is that across government collaboration. So one of the things when I came to this job, everybody lamented between local government and state government is the lack of the tie between land use and transportation. And so what we think about as the reason we can be in that space is it drives ridership. We feel like that gives us our excuse to be in that space. So we started partnering with smaller towns and communities. The IIJA is awesome if you can win money in it. And if you're a rural community, that's really hard to do. So we went to all the rural communities along a rail line we're working on and said, how about we write the grants for you, we'll administer them for you, but you have to do the skin in the game. You got to do the match. So that they had to do something, and we pursued TOD grants, so transit-oriented development grants. And so we said, you're the community, you go figure out what your vision is. We're not gonna tell you what that'll look like, but we'll help partner with you along the way. So as they have gone about figuring out how to make their community more ready for transit, for when we bring it, they're changing their land use, they're driving it more multimodal and walkable, and that's gonna drive more ridership on the investments that we make on the transit side. I think that's the efficiency at its best, that local government, state government collaboration. So I completely agree with what you said.
Great,
I
Allison.
have to get in on this. The link between transportation and land use is just so hugely important, whether you're talking about people and how they move or goods and how they move. And so where are the Amazon warehouses, just as an example, but where are warehouses and distribution centers getting sited? Do they have good connection to rail? Do they have good connection to the highway? Oftentimes they're getting sited wherever there's a parcel that's big enough for it. And then they're asking the state DOT or the city for access. And rail wasn't even a thought. So it's so important to be connecting between the state, the local government, the private sector, and making those decisions to make it as efficient as possible, as safe as possible, to reduce emissions. I mean, it all goes together. So I kind of want to hug everybody right now. Yay, land use.
Well, now staying on the efficiency note a little bit, but maybe getting a little more granular on that, let's talk a little bit about seamlessly connecting modes for efficiency. And I'd really like to know from each of you whether you see mobility hubs as one solution, or even mobility as a service, which digitally connects various modes. So Julie, give us your perspective on that.
So part of what we're doing with those local governments, we could have just designed around a rail station. That would have been the way we traditionally would have had the conversation. We'd have said, we're going to bring a rail project, you should build a rail station. But instead, we pivoted to mobility hubs, trying to be more multimodal, and said to these communities, how about we bring together all of your mobility solutions in one place, including freight, and think about how we build a hub where you can transfer between the modes seamlessly and create economic opportunity in your main street. So our state DOT is a little unique. We own pretty much all of the miles. Our counties aren't in the road building business. They're very centrally located. We got 88,000 centerline miles in the state of North Carolina. So we are the owner of Main Street in downtown USA in North Carolina. So saying to them, let's talk about how we create some economic activity in your downtown by putting that mobility hub right smack on Main Street. And then if you bring together people who are transitioning and you have more foot traffic, you're going to create more coffee shops and more breweries, and this is going to help economic spark in your town. So I do think mobility hubs are really the way we bring all those modes together. We not only create an easy way to get from A to B, but we create economic opportunity, which is such an important part of the system.
Anyone else?
mobility hubs, mobility as a service?
Well, Fort Collins, we have something, I'm sure you've heard of, the 15-minute city, right? So we're changing our land use plan to do mixed residential commercial, and then the goal is everybody is within 15 minutes of where they live, work, play, and learn. So yes, we're very intentionally setting that out, spreading our commercial. We love our old town, but we love it to death too much, so we're trying to push that out. And it's in the west, of course, we have these large tracts of single-family housing that kind of the western sprawl, and you have to drive to get milk. I mean, it's ridiculous. So the goal is, I'm like, you should be able to get milk without driving. So yes, we're being very intentional about that, and we're getting some resistance.
Sure, Jennifer.
Again, I feel a little bit like the different voice in the group here a little bit.
That's why
but
you're here, Jennifer. Didn't you figure that out?
Like when we think about it, I think one thing we think about is payment, you know, because you said seamless and micromobility hubs and things like that. And again, what's like from our view, what is difficult is when people need to download different apps, they have different payment barriers that prevent all the demographics from having access to this seamless offering. And then if we double click one time more, the next part that gives us heartburn is when you go to a different city. Like we can't have, you know, North Carolina, you know, Raleigh with this sort of ecosystem, and maybe they even have a great app to get people around. And then you go to the next city, and I need a whole different group of apps and signups, and that's kind of how we're thinking about the seamless approach. And one thing that we're focused on is, I don't know the language maybe in this group, but like a mobility budget where the corporate companies are offering to their employees a certain amount of money to spend on mobility. And via that corporate budget, they can get, they can use the money for public transport, for an e-bike, to buy an e-bike, whatever, but it kind of gives another seamless way to offer all those different offerings, but from their employer.
Great. I'd like to move on to challenges now. So you've articulated some goals, you did that earlier, and some outcomes. So what do you see as primary challenges or hurdles to achieving those, and what are your thoughts to overcoming them? And Mayor, we're gonna start with you on this one, because I know you have a lot to say.
Well, I don't like being a negative person. But
That's okay, we're gonna go to opportunities next, so you can counter.
well, we do have someone from Northern Colorado. We share our airport, our regional airport, with the locality adjacent to us. And that's a challenge. I'm not gonna lie. The governance model on that airport is a challenge. And then there's just vastly different views of where that's going. I think it should be a transit hub. I don't wanna widen the runways, improve the tower, do all this stuff and try to attract commercial aircraft there. I think that's a yesterday way of thinking. And boy, everyone looks at me like I have 3 heads when I say that. They all go, okay. And that means we'll just wait till she's not mayor anymore. That's what that look means, and that's probably what's going to happen. They'll outlast me, and they'll spend a bunch of money on commercial air travel that won't come. Markets to the Fort Collins Loveland Airport. I can't imagine why you would fly out of there and not just drive 50 minutes to Denver, or I want to do these United. We have partnered with United to offer something, a landline, so you can check in for your United flight and then take it seamlessly to Denver, which is great. We want to get a TSA agent at our little hub, and then you could actually have a wingless flight. So those ideas are great, and I think that's what we need to do more of. But the challenges are collaboration is the answer, and collaboration is the challenge. It's a human nature type of thing, and the way we've set up our cities, states, municipalities, school districts haven't, heretofore lend themselves to really a lot of share it, with different budgets. You know how it works. It's a challenge, and so you have to be committed to that. And I've just, as a student of human nature, I've observed that that's hard.
I can go. So 2 challenges that I think of. The first is funding. So IIJA was great, but it's like fits and starts of funding, and now we're talking about reauthorization. Like we have to figure out the funding problem. And I know everybody in this room knows it, right? Gas taxes are falling, we're electrifying, all those things. So we got to figure out funding for sure. But the other one is IT. So most of the solutions we're talking about tend to be in the IT space. There's some kind of technology based. And government IT entities are super risk adverse, as they should be, because there's an incredible amount of risk with government IT systems. But we find that our biggest challenges are getting our Department of Information Technology to come along with us on this journey at all. They start from no. And so AI is a great example. We're moving into AI. We already have a project underway that we're really excited about. For the consultants in the room, we're running a 3-month backlog on processing your invoices. We are very sorry. We have humans who do that. They don't make a lot of money, so we churn them. They don't stay with us long. And a level 1 approval is they look at your invoice and they say, does the formal name of your company match the formal name in our database? Does, basic, that is AI ready, right? AI those are very defined business rules. I got 16 weeks, I got a firm on it. We're gonna fix our backlog, and I'm gonna be able to tell our state legislature that we're gonna be able to task those people to other jobs and save money. So I'm super excited. Our Department of Information Technology is like, what's she doing over there without us? And how do we get a finger in that pot? And I'm holding them at bay as long as I can to get to solution, because they want to, bring all of their right concern risk to the project, but they move at a snail's pace. So I think our challenge is, how do we get government IT to get more comfortable in these spaces so we can do more innovation?
So I see the international nature of our supply chain as a pretty big challenge. I think the average person learned the importance of supply chains in 2020, 2021, 2022. Even my children, who are now 8 and 11, but were much younger, understood the importance of a supply chain, and truck drivers, and maybe commented when the UPS truck or Amazon truck didn't stop at our house that day because they were used to it coming most days, because I was ordering a lot of things to make it through the pandemic, and they got the importance of supply chain. So when you really think about what happened in the breakdown, that you've got all of these international actors making their own decisions based on their own data with no idea how others in that chain are making their decisions or how their decisions impact others, and so on and so forth. So I know we're gonna talk about opportunities, but I'm gonna talk about how we're solving this challenge, or addressing part of this challenge, is through our Flow initiative at DOT that we launched in 2022, Freight Logistics Optimization Works initiative, which is a public-private partnership data sharing, where for the first time, ocean carriers, port terminal operators, trucking, rail, shippers, beneficial cargo owners, they're sharing their proprietary data with us. We are able to anonymize it, give it back out to them, and it's informing their decision making. They have all of a sudden this bigger lens to better understand what's coming into ports that they were planning to use, or are chassis and trucks going to be where they need to be to pick up the containers. We've started small with a focus on imported containers. We want to grow the capacity to exports and to other types of cargo, but it's very exciting. For the very first time, we're able to see around corners. We've been able to put it to use with the Red Sea disruptions, with the Baltimore bridge collapse and the closure of the port there temporarily, being able to better see where containers are going, and making sure that folks got the equipment there so that we don't have this big backup of containers stacked up all over the country. So that's a challenge, and we have a solution, and it's not a government solution, it's a partnership.
A common theme throughout the conference, and certainly for this conversation. So let's talk about opportunities. I always like to get the obstacles out of the way, and then talk about what do we see as great opportunities in the future, things that are untapped that maybe no one has thought of, or you just recently thought of, that many of us should be jumping on. So Allison, can you carry us through that and take us to opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. At the breakfast panel this morning, we heard from Chris with the port about, and I think we heard from Will too. I think everyone talked about, sometimes we just do things because that's the way they've always been done. And in goods movement in particular, when you look at the paper-based systems that still get used at ports, just the antiquated way that things get done, because that's the way they've always been done. There's so much opportunity there with AI, with technology, with our Flow data initiative of doing things differently, thinking about how sidewalks get used and curb management and doing things differently and partnering. We've got a really big system of underutilized inland waterways. So our highways are at capacity, but we've got this system that's got lots of capacity in our waterway system. Rail isn't always as highly used as it could be. Drones, I know, Julie, you're doing some pretty cool stuff in North Carolina with drones. So there's all these opportunities when you're talking about technology and collaboration, about, you know, how do we make supply chains more efficient, bring down our greenhouse gas emissions, reduce the impact of the system to those that are bearing the burden of it. I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities in that space for sure.
Great. Anyone like to add on the opportunity discussion?
I'll just briefly say I am an eternal optimist. As much as I am a student of human nature, I also think that we're really smart. And honestly, that's why I wanted to come to this conference, because I wanted something different. I didn't want to go to the normal sort of cities conference where, you know, it kind of gets bogged down. It's conferences like this and people like you that really give me a lot of energy. So thank you.
Well, I got to jump in, Beth, because why I came was to get ideas. So we just launched our Advanced Mobility NC framework. You can find it online if you Google it. Since I sit across different modes, I couldn't help but see in the innovation space the commonalities between what's happening in the autonomous shuttle world in our integrated mobility division and what was happening in our drone space with BVLOS and eVTOL. So, gosh, we really are an acronym-based business. You know, if you think about, they're both trying to move people, they're both using similar types of radar and LiDAR. The manufacturing of those two systems share a lot of the same supply chain. And so this framework was to basically put together and say, how will we evaluate use cases? We're really excited. We started in the drone space. We moved into the integrated mobility space with autonomous shuttles. How do we identify the right use cases in North Carolina and get the new technology deployed in North Carolina so that we can practice with it, so that we can understand what's coming in the future? The infrastructure we're building every day is for about 50 years. If we're laying concrete, we better know what the future looks like so we're prepared for those things. So whether it's curb design, so our autonomous shuttle has an automatic ramp that deploys, and the pitch of that is really important to being ADA functional. So that is helping inform how we build curbs today. If it was with our drones and thinking about the future of vertiports, which we've talked a lot about, if we're building mobility hubs today, are they future-proofed for vertiports when we're ready to add those to our mobility hub? So my pitch to everyone who's got a new technology coming is check out our framework and then come and talk to us, because we're looking for actively our next use cases.
And again, so from my side, the way that we're looking at opportunities is we don't want to just be the users of all this new technology that's coming, but we want to benefit from the job creation. So because we want to benefit from the job, I mean, it does us no good if most of the innovations that we buy come from Asia, if the battery value chain comes from Asia. So these are the topics that we find optimism, but also urgency in making sure that these value chains connected with the new technologies are secured. So when it comes to electrification, it's not just the battery, it's the cells, it's the cathodes, it's the mining, it's the recycling. This has to be secured and prioritized in order to because again, if we're just users of that, but we lost all the jobs, we lost all the economy connected to it, then we kind of, again, missed a big opportunity. And I think Mike had mentioned it as well, like the topic of reshoring. I think there's different topics right now. You know, we can try to reshore solar or things like that. We can try to technology leapfrog in batteries, okay? We're still a little bit in the race, but we really need to like double leapfrog to catch up. Then there's other topics like hydrogen. Let's start planning now, right, to make sure that we're creating the hydrogen value chain to be secure when, what Allison said, you know, when there is a national security, when there is I hope there's not another pandemic, but when there is something that threatens something so core as to having access to basic need type, you know, basic needs that are supplied by our freight system.
Great. And I think, Allison, you already talked about something that I always thought was an opportunity, but you're really doing it, and that's the data sharing with the private sector. I just think it's amazing what you've been able to accomplish through the FLOW program, because I know many of my colleagues and I have worked with with our infrastructure owners to try to affect that. So I think we really appreciate the federal government and what you're doing in that regard.
Thank you. If I could just say, I mean, this is a major problem, right? That like we've got this opaque system. I think it is so rare for the federal government to see that and find a quick and nimble and relatively cheap, really. I mean, like General Lyons, when he was on board as the freight envoy for the White House at USDOT, we had a handoff. I started and he left a couple months later, and he said, you know, this is the kind of initiative I've seen in government where it costs tens of billions of dollars and 10 to 15 years to get it going. We got it off the ground for, you know, $2 million, $3 million over 2 years, where, you know, Home Depot was in September meeting with us talking about the first tranche of data they got and how they were using it to inform their decision making. Like, that is so rare in government. And I'm going to keep talking about it because it's so exciting. So thank you. I'm going to keep taking every opportunity to talk about flow.
And I think there's a workshop later where you'll get to talk about it even more.
Oh, I will, but I'll make it interesting. I won't say all the same things, I promise.
You'll just get to delve deeper into it. So I'm looking forward to that myself. Let's talk a little bit more about innovation. So, I mean, Julie, you talked about some innovations that you're already investing in North Carolina. Are there any others that you see that will add or improve upon what you're already doing? And also, I'd like to add to that question, how is that, you just released the Advanced NC Strategic Plan. Certainly there are next steps related to that. So how are new technological advancements and innovations going to inform that as well? So two-part question.
Sure. So one of the most interesting corridors I think we're thinking about right now is our corridor between the mainland and our island of Ocracoke. So Ocracoke currently is accessed by our ferry system, our state-run ferry system, and we are facing enormous challenges in keeping that going. And the reason, not only because it's an island, but it is the economic hub of the poorest county in our state, Hyde County. They depend on the tax revenues they pull in season in Ocracoke to support that county the entire rest of the year. So either we're going to help that economy succeed or we're going to underwrite it in our state budget. So obviously we'd rather help their economy succeed. And so the ferry system long-term is a huge challenge. The channels are changing. They're experiencing sea level rise. They're experiencing erosion. Highway 12, we have two guys who do nothing all day, every day, but push sand off Highway 12. And we spend millions doing that. Our stacking lanes for the ferry and our terminal have fallen in the water. We are about to lose our septic system and move to pump and haul. So we are fighting this battle on a daily basis. So because I sit over different modes, right? And I'm having these conversations about air mobility. I'm like, hold on. Like, are we going to invest $500 million in different types of vessels, different terminal to come into the mainland that may not be there 20, 25 years from now? What's the BCA on that? And instead think about air mobility. And I think that's kind of the cool thing when you get to work across the modes and across the silos. So we're working on a corridor, a BV loss corridor. Could we sensor up a corridor and get with a company like Beta we're in conversations with to actually start doing a use case, moving people and goods through the air initially to Ocracoke? I mean, that's just a really interesting place to be doing that because initially it's pretty rural, so there's a lot less risk and a lot less conflict and a really well-defined need and something urgent. So that's where this advanced mobility framework comes in. Like, that's a corridor that's really interesting, that we could do an interesting use case, that we could do some partnership we can justify. So I think that's the next stage of that, is to figure out where do we find the right match of the problem and the technology and the partners who are interested. Like a Hyde County could never lift that by themselves, so we belong in that space with them. That's what I think is really exciting about the next steps of the framework.
Yes, Mayor.
So thinking about innovation and risk, and somebody was talking about risk, governments aren't that great at risk. But what you need to do is intentionally cultivate a culture of, I feel like my role, of encouraging risk and then being tolerant of failure. That's the backside, right? So you can't be encouraging innovation and punitive for failure. And when you do that, there's no better squasher of innovation or creativity than any sort of that sort of thing. So Fort Collins pictures itself as innovative. We are the city of innovation or the future in the Smithsonian. I think that probably used to be the case. We've had some big fails, and then there was some. Let me put it this way: there was less high tolerance for that for the failure. So I just wanted to make that point. So our little airport, we tried to do the remote control tower, and there were only 2 in the United States, and the FAA shut down Leesburg and put a stop work order on ours. So guess what? It didn't work. Okay, that's okay. Everybody's like freaking out. All right, calm down, everybody. It's okay. We tried something, it didn't work. It may work soon, it may work in the future, but right now, what are we gonna do? Get a mobile tower, we're gonna put some radar in. I think that that's just an important point, because I know in the private sector, you guys deal with that all the time, every day. It's just a different thing for governments to be able to think that way, and I want to make that point about tolerance of failure.
Well, and certainly there are learnings along the way. I mean, recent conversations that I've had and some of my colleagues, for example, the Florida Department of Transportation, they try a lot of things. And not all of it moves forward, but they've learned a lot to apply to the next opportunity. So there are great learnings to have in that. So really appreciate your comments relative to that. I think what I'd like to do, I know this morning at the breakfast talk, where we heard from the great panelists there, they talked about public-public partnerships and public-private partnerships. So I was wondering if you could identify maybe some additional opportunities in both of those particular areas, and maybe if there's any, I think one of you might have a little bit of a call to action relative to public and private partnerships and understanding that relates to some of the things that Mike said. So maybe Jennifer, could you begin the conversation?
Sure. So actually, our company was founded as a public-private partnership. So essentially, using funding from the public sector and then investing in new innovation, but with the goal of developing a sustainable business model ourselves. And that's what we did. So essentially, we invest in new technologies, new startups, start using the funding initially from the public sector, and now we live from the business that created. So we exit, we now have 4 unicorns in our portfolio. We do exits, and we also brought in 29 different shareholders. And the shareholders, some come from academia, but most come from industry and the financial sector. And the reason why this was important is that the financial institutions, like SocGen or ING, they have very deep pockets. And when it comes to hardware investing, they can take over once we run out of money. So when these next projects need 200 million for the next phase, 300 million, you then also can lean on them to support the future investing. We have the industry on board because, again, if it doesn't make sense from an industrial standpoint, from a commercial standpoint, then we're not going to go for it. So the way we de-risk it is we use that initial funding, we bring to the table the stakeholders. Let's say, like in an automotive case, maybe this is an automotive company. We bring in a financial institution. We have offtake agreements, and then we can de-risk it by having everyone at the table who's sharing in that risk and in that commitment.
Anyone else like to add on public-public partnerships or public-private partnership?
So I'd talk about 2. So the public-public, what we're really proud of is that effort to access IIJA. State DOTs, I say this every time I'm with state DOTs, like we should be leaning in and helping these smaller communities. We did a grant application for 2 rural communities to put a trail in their community. And when you're a small rural community, going after $20 million of federal funds is game-changing for your community. We submitted to 2 different federal grant opportunities, and they won it twice. I mean, there's nothing better than a grant opportunity written so well that you win it twice. So they won $42 million, and we called the USDOT, and we said, y'all awarded it twice, which is great. What do you want us to do? And they said, go do more of it. Keep it all and go do more of it, which was super cool. So the public-public partnership opportunities, I think, are phenomenal with all of the money that's available out there. The second in public-private partnerships is our Charlotte Gateway Station. So our team had the great insight almost 20 years ago now to realize that our rail station in Charlotte was not in downtown Charlotte, which they call uptown, but I'm gonna call it downtown. It's the first time I took it 20 years ago, one would just assume you'd get off the train where you needed to be in the center of a community. So I was like in a suit, in heels with my rollerboard and got off the station and looked around and thought, where am I? There are no high-rise towers. And I could see them off in the distance. So the team had gone and bought a piece of property next to Panther Stadium. If we tried to buy that now, there'd be no way we could afford a piece of property like that. And it was all the money they had because unlike every other mode in the federal government, rail gets no formulaic funds. You got to win every dollar of it. So they only had enough to buy the land at the time and hold it until we could do something with it. Well, then the city went and won a Tiger grant, and then they put together a deal for a P3. So we have a developer on board now. We've got the land. The city's got the Tiger grant. We're going to put our rail station in there, so we'll pay the lease ongoing, and the developer's going to do the mixed-use tower around it. So we have, I think, a model in that P3 to then take to all the other mobility hubs that we're going to do just at smaller scale across North Carolina. So I was thinking about Mike's comments this morning about Brightline. That was the aha moment for us. I've spent a lot of time in Florida because of Brightline, understanding that it's the real estate play that's really significant. So helping local governments buy the property to have the control of the property so that then they can create the P3 opportunity. That it is a financing mechanism, but it's an opportunity to bring, I think, partners to the table that have not been brought together before. So I really think this P3 mobility hub opportunity is going to be a really growing area in states.
Great, thank you. Now I'd like to open it up to a couple of questions from the audience. Anyone have a question? Oh, we have one up here and one in the back of the room.
Good morning, and this was a great panel. I was Googling while you all were talking. City of Fort Collins and also NCDOT, and Beth actually mentioned this, the strategic plan that you both have. I wanted to ask, how has the role of those two plans kind of played into how you've kind of shored up those silos within your organization and work through some of the challenges, and how useful are they to helping you achieve your goals towards things like innovation and efficiency and goods movement?
So Fort Collins has a lot of plans, but were you talking about city plan maybe? Yeah, and then every year that we do a strategic plan, and then we mesh that with council priorities and so on and so forth. Yeah, we take it very seriously, and we report back, and every ordinance we pass or don't pass, as the case may be, is clearly labeled where it fits into our strategic plan. So our city staff is extremely attentive to those plans and responsive because they were thoroughly publicly stakeholdered. Probably ad nauseum, we tend to overdo things in Fort Collins, which we can talk about process at some point as an inefficiency. It's hard to get it just right, but once you do go through a rigorous process like that and the people have spoken and added feedback, then it's really nice what the city staff does and say, oh, this fits into, and we have 7 big goals. Then, we have the big moves and all that stuff, but they tie it back in. So you can see how each individual ordinance is adding to what the people have said about where they want the city to go.
Yeah, I agree. We our strategic plan, I think the value is much in the process of developing it. So convening all the stakeholders, all the communities, getting all that input is also getting people comfortable with it. I think somebody talked earlier about Paris not being able to achieve the AAM goals that they laid out, and part of that was pushback from the community that maybe wasn't ready for it. So I think that input and that stakeholder process in the innovation space is really important to getting communities comfortable with where we're going. My team will tell you, we write big plans, and there's nothing worse than a plan that sits on a shelf. It is just my antithesis of what we do. And so I said, yes, let's write a plan. I'll have a plan. Show me the executive summary. I want it no more than 4 to 5 pages. I want it super graphic, because that's the thing that we're going to push out and get people to read so that everybody's aware of what we're doing. Our state legislature needs to be well informed, and they're not going to read more than the executive summary. The executive summary becomes the PowerPoint slide so we can go and talk about it everywhere. So I think it's all about a communication tool and a process to get people to know where you're going, to get that buy-in to where you're going, and then my rule is like, do that super fast. If nobody stops me, then just keep running. So it's sort of like, people can't say they didn't know, because we blasted it everywhere, right? And they had a chance to weigh in. If they didn't, then I think that that's an agreement. So I think it's really important for that, and to communicate to potential partners that we're interested. The whole innovation space for us is ultimately about landing manufacturing. So North Carolina is super interested in manufacturing. So our pitch is, we want to have the startups engaging with us early, because sooner or later they're going to get to market and do manufacturing, and we'll have built a relationship that hopefully we can land the manufacturing. This is a little bit of that, but in Siemens, with all the new train orders, Siemens needed to build a new plant on the East Coast. And because we had been so heavily engaged with them through our rail division, when they decided to make their manufacturing decision, the relationship that they had built with us in our rail division and our knowledge is what landed that investment in North Carolina. We are super proud that if you're getting new trains, they're very likely going to be built in North Carolina. But that's the kind of space we want to be in. And so if you've got a new product and you're going to get it to the manufacturing stage, do not forget North Carolina.
That's great, Julie. Thank you. And I think we had a question. We have time for one more.
Yes. Hi, ladies. Thank you so much for everything that you do, first of all. My name is Lakeisha. I'm the owner of BS Express Delivery. I'm not even in the public sector. I'm in the private sector. This is my first time actually even being in a trade show like this. But I came here for guidance for the future of the children with the beauty industry. So we created a new ecosystem, and the new ecosystem is tied into apprenticeship that ties in mobility and manufacturing. So I'm here trying to scale in multiple states, because we have a solution, but our voice is not being heard. I think what you guys are doing is great, but if we don't create an apprenticeship program to get the younger bodies to work, that's bodies right there that we could use for a more resilient supply chain by getting them out actually doing workforce components and even mobility to be able to service. So I want to speak to anybody who wants to consider our MVP, because we do have an apprenticeship program here that we started in Florida for the beauty industry that ties into mobility and manufacturing. And we created a new ecosystem strategy so we can take to multiple states as far as America pushing apprenticeship.
Well,
Thank you.
I love that you're talking about apprenticeships. Couldn't agree more. We have huge workforce challenges in the mobility industry. We have an apprenticeship program. We now have high school internships, college internships, apprenticeships, HBCU fellows. There's a joke in our state, like if you can't get them when they're in the womb, then we're not going to get them when they're ready to get a job. So I couldn't agree more. That is such an important part of developing our workforce in the mobility space.
And I could touch, at USDOT, we do have funding for on-the-job training programs, apprenticeship programs that go out to states. Every state DOT has programs. There's grants that can be applied for. There's formula funding. There's money states have that they might not use in that way, but they can. It's an eligible use. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and everybody in the transportation and mobility space acknowledges that the workforce isn't there. We've got to grow it. We've got to make sure it's diverse, that it represents, what America looks like. And I think there are some I'm not the right person to point out the really good examples that we've got. We've got a whole team working on that, both in DC and in our offices around the country. But there's definitely money and investment. But it's it's just getting at the surface. I mean, there needs to be a big focused effort. We've got other agencies at the federal level that are also investing, in apprenticeship programs for different sectors. But it's definitely out there. I would encourage you to talk with. It sounds like you're doing some great work with government here. The state DOT has options. There's opportunities out there for sure.
That's great. Well, as we close out our panel, we've had great dialogue up here, some interaction with the audience. What I'd like to do as we wrap up is maybe a lightning round, which will start with the mayor. Any key takeaway that you would like to leave with this audience, whether it's something we've already discussed or something maybe that we missed? Mayor, floor is yours.
It's all about relationships. That's all.
Spoken like a true mayor.
North Carolina is open for business for innovation. I will connect you with whoever the right person is in our organization, but we are very interested in partnering.
Don't forget about the extra pot of money that's sitting around in this VC and investment space, because we're looking to spend it as well, and I think we just need to do some more partnerships.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Collaboration, connection, and partnerships. That's what I hope you take away. And flow. Go flow.
So there was a method in my madness for Allison to go last, because I do want to talk about flowing into a workshop that's happening at 11:15, which is the Port to Porch workshop, which will delve more into innovations and efficiencies within the entire goods mobility ecosystem. So that's in workshop room 1, so I would encourage you to go to that if that's an area of interest for you. And with that, thank you to our great panelists. And thank you to all of you who are here and dialoguing with us. And thank you, CoMotion, and enjoy the remainder of the day.
Hi, thank you, Beth, and everyone. I just wanted to let you know that right now we are also still having a workshop on the transition in EVs and infrastructure and equity in that transition. So if you're interested, head over to workshop room 1 right now. It's still taking place. There's a lot of great learnings to happen. And then we also have on our innovation stage our next mobility round of the Mobility Challenge startup pitches. Thank you.
Oh yeah. Actually, can I just have Millicent, Thibaut, Romy, Marcel just come on up, and we're just gonna go ahead and get everybody up here and then get the conversation going. No particular order. Just feel free to jump in. All right. Fantastic. All right, so if you've come to tell stories with big data, then you've come to the right place. But all right, let's go ahead and get started. I'll let each of you introduce yourselves in just a moment. You all have really impressive bios, and so instead of me just going through and reading each of them, I'll let you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, a little bit about the work you do, and in particular, your kind of angle or approach or perspective on the use of big data in general. But taking a step back real quick, so this session is not just about data. It's really about storytelling. And it's really about how we use data, and not just more data, but actually better data to tell stories as we try to address some real serious challenges in the transportation space. And whether that's safety or equity, access, climate change. Millicent, I heard you say freedom the other day. Transportation really means freedom. How there's a lot of stories to tell in working towards more positive outcomes in these areas. But we want to make sure that we have the right data to tell the stories. And again, emphasizing not just more data, but actually good data. So. My name's Andrew Glass Hastings. I'm the Executive Director of the Open Mobility Foundation. And for those of you who don't know, the OMF is no stranger to data. We focus on bringing cities and public agencies together with technology companies and mobility operators to co-create open source data standards. So the Mobility Data Specification, the de facto global standard for shared mobility, is used by cities around the world to understand how shared mobility is moving around the city, and understand whether or not these services are meeting some of the goals and addressing some of the challenges that cities have on their streets. We also steward the curb data specification that cities are using to digitize their curb rules and regulations. And so there's a lot of data flowing around the sort of ecosystem here. But we don't always use it in a way to tell the stories or to address the challenges that are most present in our communities. So I'm like I mentioned, I want to turn it over to my panelists, and Romy, I'll just start with you. So let's start by just take a few minutes and tell us a little bit about yourself, the work you do, and your experience, not just your experience with data, but how you try to use data to tell kind of a better and more coherent story.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. Great joining you. This is I think my second panel with you here, so getting used to this here. Yeah, my name is Romy Valera. I'm president of Automotis, and we are a vision software company, and all we're trying to do is work with our partners, like Millicent and her team, to solve problems at, safety hazards at the curb. So we are actively automating, the public right-of-way and in ways that allows for the reduction of traffic, the reduction of double parking, dwell time, et cetera, and allowing our partners, not only cities, but also delivery drivers an opportunity to conduct their business in the cities that they're working. For me, the word data is, I like to kind of equal that to actionable. So whatever data you're collecting, whatever data you're supporting, it's got to have some action. It's interesting that I think I've heard the term, may have been maybe the parking authority says, we are information rich, but decision making poor. I think it's what they say. It's because got a ton of data, but what do they do with it? And historically, I started in the industry 34 years ago in this city. I'm a local, so it's great to go home at the end of the night and sleep in my bed. So I appreciate these kind of conferences. But I started in this city working in the on-street space. I was a parking enforcement officer 34 years ago. If you were here 34 years ago in front of this college, you probably got a ticket issued by me, guaranteed. And that's how I started. And that was my public administration work. But it's how I started managing the curb with pen and paper. Fast forward to 35 years, and if you ask me, where has the industry gone as it relates to the collection of that data that exists, that is plentiful and a ton of data points, it's exponential. However, the policies that support these administration of these cities is still lacking behind. So for me, the data also have to include not only actionable, but you have to have the right policy to what do you do with all that data? Because sometimes you can't do much with it. So,
Thibaut?
So hi everyone. I'm Thibaut Castan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Vianova. At Vianova, we use AI and big data to analyze and optimize the movement of goods and people in the built environment. And so I've been in the data space for almost 12 years now. I actually started as a financial engineer in investment banking and the hedge fund community. So I studied at University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, did my master's degree there, and at the time, it was how can we actually hedge counterparty risk back in 2011 after the Lehman crisis, and how could we actually combine different data points to understand basically credit risk for investment banks and trying to hedge that. And now in the mobility and transportation world, it's very similar. And how can we actually combine different data sources in terms of creating the right insights for municipalities and DOTs? And we also say the same at Vianova. I think municipalities and DOTs are data rich, but they're insights poor. And I think it comes by, providing the right tooling basically and the right knowledge to make sure that we can transform and de-silo the data to make sure that this data is becoming insights heavy. And I think the small story that I would share, maybe the first one is, I'm sure like some of you basically have heard about what happened in London, in TfL, with the 20 miles per hour speed reduction. And it's been a big debate between the city government and the central government around these speed limits that are being applied actually in many of the British cities. And the central government said that the speed reduction in urban environment was anti-British culture. And so clearly, like there has been a lot of struggle and debate around that. And we've been working with TfL on the Vision Zero program for almost 18 months now, collecting a lot of data on safety data, driving events, cycling and pedestrian flows, etc. And about half of the road network of London has been converted to 20 miles per hour. And what has been shown is a reduction of 25% of serious injuries and fatalities in the last 3 years, 63% reduction in pedestrian fatalities in the last 3 years. So we clearly see that in the urban environment, reduction of speed has an impact. And like Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London that got re-elected, can probably have that in his in his booklet of achievements. Yeah.
That's a great example. I mean, that's a key way of being able to use data to tell a very clear story that speed kills. And reducing speeds has a direct impact on saving people's lives, whether you're walking, riding a bicycle, or even in a car. So that's great. Millicent, thank you for being here. PBOT, Portland Bureau of Transportation, one of the founding members of the Open Mobility Foundation, still on our board today, so thank you for the leadership. I'm really excited to have you here. Would you tell us a little bit about, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work you're doing in Portland around data and storytelling?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. We're excited to be a part of this conversation. Millicent Williams, I'm the director of the Portland Bureau of Transportation, Portland, Oregon, just in case you were wondering. But I'm excited about being in a space and in a city that really embraces innovation and seeks to improve communities across the city to ensure that people are given the opportunity to make choices around how they'd like to move about the city. Certainly we are focusing on how we can move people out of single occupancy vehicles. One of the ways that we would do that is by encouraging cycling as an option. And while that may be challenging for some to embrace as one of the ways that we intend to move the work forward, it's important for us to, as has been said, look at not just the information, but the data, and then what are we doing with the data. So we do a ton of community engagement all the time. We talk about how we can make sure that we're best equipping folks to move about the city. And traditionally, we've asked individuals their opinions, their thoughts. But what we found was that the typical frequent flyers would answer all the questions, and the people who we were seeking to serve would not always be involved in the conversations. And so we needed to find less specific, less person-specific ways to capture information and data, and then use that to inform how we're going to move our projects forward. And so I have an example of a project on a high crash corridor that we are seeking to reallocate lanes and instead of reorganize the road so that we can have a dedicated bicycle facility and dedicated bus facility. And the very loud voices were like, no, we don't want that. Nobody rides a bike out here. And the answer was, well, could it be because there's no place for them to do that safely and comfortably? And not that we subscribe to the if we build it, they will come notion. But honestly, if you build it and it's safe and you provide access and understanding of how to best use that space in the built environment, then people will use it. And so we were able to devise a plan, design a project that really does meet the needs of a variety of users, and that allows us to not just create the options for people, but also address the things that are challenges for all of our communities, which is around carbon emissions. We've acknowledged in the last panel that I was on that transportation, the industry, contributes 40% of carbon emissions to the environment. So how are we working actively to address that? So I came into this space thinking about how do we get to solutions, and how are we using the information, and or are we even using the information? That was one of my first questions. So I'm not a traditional transportation professional. In fact, I have a very circuitous path to getting here, but what I am is a career public servant with a dedication to solving problems and being able to see a problem and solve a problem. That's what I love about local government, is that I can see it today and we can send a crew out to do something about it today. But that, even that is challenging when you're working in a city that has been woefully underinvested in its transportation network, when there are assumptions around how taxpayer dollars are being used. Many of our projects are not funded by taxpayer dollars. In fact, most of our projects are not. It's a challenge. And so helping to make decisions about what we're doing as a bureau using data that we're able to collect from all the different sources, small data and now big data, really does make a big difference for us as a city.
Thanks, Millicent. Marcel, so no stranger to data, a part of the original, the kind of the OG team and the creation of the mobility data specification at LADOT, now at LA Metro. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience and sort of conversation around data to tell stories in the context of a really important agency like LA Metro.
Sure, thank you. And first off, I just want to thank you, Andrew, again for including me on the panel. I also want to give a shout out to John Rassant and the CoMotion team. It's just I'm used to going to CoMotion LA, which is an awesome event that everyone should come to if you haven't been there. But it's just incredible what you've done here in Miami. Congratulations on the 5 years here, because I think it definitely brings a different set of players and different perspectives, and so something I really appreciate and worthwhile to come and make this trip. Yeah, I feel like a grandpa when we're talking about data, because we really was kind of forged in the fire in terms of, in the best way, right? Really testing, the reaches of kind of data conversations, data policy, data privacy, data security, like really making sure that we have stories to tell, and we're really trying to tie the use of data to projects and implementation. And so my career started off really working in an elected office for a young council member, at the time, Councilmember Eric Garcetti, who went on to become mayor, and served himself 21 years in the city of Los Angeles. And so was very spoiled by coming up surrounded by his team and himself in a group that was very data-driven. I think about it today still because I've lived in Los Angeles this whole time, and I remember thinking about, as a young staffer, one of the things we did every year was we would do a graffiti count. So all 25 staff members would jump in cars, and every year we would count graffiti, how many tags, because we were tracking how our anti-graffiti program that really required block captains and empowered community members to really clean up the streets. And so we would track that. And so that was kind of like an early understanding for me of the importance of collecting data to tell a story. And we had one of our communications people, and again, we were blessed to have multiple incredible comms people, but like, as an example, our comms director at the time, Julie Wong, she's now just a lead writer for Grey's Anatomy. It's just this type of thing where it's just about telling the story. And the mayor, if you ever have the opportunity to be with him and hear his vision and his story for not just LA, but the globe and the environment. He's now ambassador to India, weaving his stories out there, and just really exciting. So that was really kind of the foundation. And so as transportation technology emerged, I think there was a real high bar for what are we doing, right? As we look at collecting data, what are the stories we're telling? How are we really impacting policy and impacting change? I think going back to the early days of capturing data around scooters, it led to system optimization in Venice, right? Where we had at one point 900 scooters from 5 different companies in a 2 square mile radius, right? And we were able to use that data to create a regulation, special operating zone that narrowed it down to 120 scooters that had to have a early morning deployment every day and a reset, that we would physically go out and audit. And those 120 scooters delivered the same number of rides cumulatively that the 900 scooters were doing. So it was an ability to use data to really govern and use the public space, and because the alternative was, or we get all of these guys out of here. That was the focus from the council member. We either get these guys in line, or we regulate them, and that's what we did, right? And so that was an example. Again, on the scooter story, right? We used data to drive early infrastructure improvements on a main corridor, so that we could demonstrate in the link, look, we're getting this data and we're using this data to actually now go and invest in safety improvements on this corridor, right? And telling that story. I think now at LA Metro, I think we take that there, and again, it's not just me; it's a number of leaders. Our CEO Stephanie Wiggins has been in the industry a long time. She was the initial shepherder of the kind of project manager for express lanes, in tolling, and she had to tell a story, right? And so everything that we do is around story. And right now, I know that we'll probably get into a little bit, but there's a lot of eyes on transit, right? We had a sit-in where several of our bus operators, called out sick on Friday, protesting, what they feel is a lack of safety. And so again, we have to do communications both internally, externally, and really drive the needle using insights that we can, because we can't just, throw our hands up and say we're doing stuff without actually measuring it.
So I want to take a step back with this next question. Before I do, so as a moderator, I love getting really good discussion going with the panel, but also I want to get discussion going with all of you. So I don't want to save Q&A till the very end, and I've cleared this with the panel. So think of the questions that you have related to this that you'd like to sort of start a discussion here with this group on stage. And after this next question, we'll take a moment and try and get a couple of questions. So don't feel like you have to save your question until the very end of the conversation. Let's try to foster a little bit of discussion here as we go along. But this next question, Millicent, I want to start with you, and it's a question for all of you, but it's a little bit of a foundational question. So what is big data? What is big data from your perspective? Because it's something that, data, big data, we throw it out there, but what does it mean to you?
Well, I'll be honest, when I was asked to participate on this panel, I asked myself that question as well. What is the difference between data and big data? And I kind of alluded to it in my initial comments, but we at the Portland Bureau of Transportation view big data is that data that we're collecting from all of the, or many of the innovative uses, the scooters, e-bikes, our parking tools, all of the ways that we're managing the curb. We're pulling all of that information together, speed data, traffic data, pulling all of that information together, and then creating the cloud of opportunities for us to inform decision making. So it's not just a singular point of information or a singular source of information, but it's a multitude of sources that are pointed at helping us to tell the story, but also helping us to see more universally where our opportunities are and where our greatest challenges are. As we grapple between how we price the right-of-way, how we price the curb, how we regulate the curb, how we manage the curb, how we regulate T&Cs, how we do all of those things, being cognizant of what is informing our next steps is really important. And so big data for us is that collection of all of those partners in problem solving, bringing their data and information together so that we can then, as a city and as the manager of the right-of-way, the maintainer of the right-of-way, make the best, highest and best use of our investments, but highest and best use of the right-of-way as well. An example is, of course, many cities during the pandemic looked to alternatives to support businesses who otherwise probably would have failed because they didn't have the opportunity to invite guests into their facilities, into their restaurants, into their businesses. And so businesses were able to extend to the curb or even use parking spaces during the pandemic to expand their footprint, A, to keep people distanced from each other, B, and to continue to keep their businesses alive as an ultimate consequence. My question from the beginning of our conversation on that is, how much is this costing us? Because this is an amenity that we're providing, certainly necessary, got to keep the city moving and alive. But how do we figure out what the best use of the right-of-way is? How do we price it? How do we provide equity and parity in the use of that? And how are we using data? So for us, it is that's helping to inform our decisions. And when we say big, that's what we're talking about. We have a couple of other pilot projects that we can talk about later that really help us to demonstrate how we're capturing other types of data as well.
Awesome. Thibaut, Romy, from the perspective of your companies, what's big data?
So I think big data is big in terms of the size. Just to give like an order of magnitude, so at Vienova we've currently like around 50 million connected vehicles here in the US in terms of streaming data from connected vehicles, whether this is from OEMs or telematics company, and close to 100 million connected mobile phones. So altogether, this is 50 billion data points per day that are being streamed. If you look at Google, so Google is 2.7 billion searches per day, and Visa is 0.6 billion transactions per day. So mobility data is big in terms of both because it's geolocation data and also it's time series. So it's evolving through time. And so that makes it basically very complex to stream in real time. Not all the use cases basically require like real-time streaming. A lot of planning use cases only need basically historical information, but anything from obviously like curb compliance, curb monitoring requires basically real-time streaming. Anything from emergency response basically on highway corridors, etc., requires like real-time streaming. And so I think that's what I would call big in terms of the size, but also in terms of the different formats that needs to be handled. Luckily, we have the OMF that is there to standardize everything. But the truth is that in the transportation smart city world, there's a lot of different formatting, and there's a lot of cleansing and reformatting and data engineering to do before even the data is exploitable. So that's what I would also mention as part of the big data scope.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite questions. Like, what is big data? And you're like, Jesus, if you look at it from an enterprise perspective, is any key indicator that's generated by the performance of the business that's either measured or not. But in many cases, when it's gathered, it can lead you to a different performance outcome. So, as it relates to the cities and partners we work with, we're talking about the eventuality of anything that happens in a particular piece of the real estate, in this case, in the curb. And, interesting enough, it's anything from not only vehicle, but vehicle throughput, but pedestrian, micromobility, the TNCs, the touch points, then also the violations, the number of opportunities for sending an invoice, all these number of different, key indicators that we're tracking for our partners that then it becomes actionable or not.
That's great. All right, so this is the first opportunity for audience participation. So questions? John, right up here in front.
Thanks. I'm curious to understand, Marcel, you talked about going back to 2016, 2017 when the LADOT was starting to get massive amount of data from scooters, from a variety of companies, the origins of OMF around that time, a little bit later. What seems to me truly new right now is the development of large
So how does the ability to very quickly, use, process, analyze through, whether it's large language models or other algorithms, the vast quantities of data that is now available? How's that changing your work?
I mean, Millicent, is that something that you're looking at in your department, or do you rely on vendors to do that sort of thing? Thanks.
A little bit of both. I will share that the implementation and use of data, big data, is essentially placing traditional transportation planning on its ear. A component of transportation planning does involve that deep engagement with community, understanding what the needs are, and going through a often long and arduous process to get to a solution set that will allow for implementation. What we are able to do now is very quickly see not just what the problem is, but where the problems are specifically, and deploy solutions there. So I think, if anything, the entity has to catch up with the data versus the data informing in the opposite direction. So it's more a personal change, a cultural change around how we are going to be able to move our work forward. I'm excited about it. If I'm anything, it's impatient and don't quite understand why it takes us so long to do certain things. And when the response is we're still working with community to get a greater understanding, or we're still trying to understand how this space is being used, that doesn't sound like a sufficient answer for me. And so it will, and it already has begun to, change the way that we apply urgency to problem solving. And again, it defies convention as it relates to the traditional transportation planning, design, and implementation models. But we have to be sensitive to the fact that it's there. And we shouldn't squander the opportunity to look at ourselves differently and see how we might be able to be more responsive, and not just use our own internal compass in terms of how we're going to move our work forward, but really work in partnership with the entities that are doing the work already. It doesn't make sense for us to recreate the wheel. I think often that is a symptom of a greater problem. But we have the opportunities, as we've already discussed. PBOT is a founding member of OMF's board, and it's great to have that type of connection and understanding of the need for the use of the information. How we institutionalize that change is probably where we are going to face the greatest opportunity for growth.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm happy to add on that. So we at Vienova, we've been using AI since 2021. So we had actually a major project 2 years ago now with Amsterdam around the CO2 simulation, so CO2 impact simulation on planning projects. So we were actually using the MDS data and other data sets to simulate the CO2 impact of planning new cycling lanes and creating mobility hubs in the city of Amsterdam. And so city of Amsterdam basically has the CO2 carbon footprint as like a major KPI into their planning decisions. And so clearly one of the use of AI was how do we actually improve the simulation model and what's the impact of new planning projects basically on this CO2 saving. So I think what I would say, in our environment at Vienova, we're starting to use LLM more as a decision support for decision analytics, for mobility analytics. So how can we actually bring more of a co-pilot basically to our users? And that means, for instance, for safety, that would be a recommendation engine. So the sort of the safety world is quite codified in terms of what are the issues basically, and which sort of planning decisions you have to make. So you can quite quickly model that through a decision tree and sort of provide and sort of with reinforcement learning help our users basically getting the best recommendation in terms of what to do with the risk factors that they have and the insights that they can collect. So that's quite kind of one path that we see. There's a lot of things to do on anomalies detection or predictive analytics. But clearly, I think what we have to to look at with LLM is that there is only a certain amount of things that you can transfer through the language rather than through the vision. And so transportation is a physical world, and it's not a language world. And so basically, like the number of data points, I think it's 1,000 times higher in terms of your visual capabilities than your language capabilities, right? So there's only a certain amount of things that you can actually translate to someone else through the language rather than through the vision. And so that's why like autonomous vehicle and software basically around autonomous vehicles taking much longer than expected because it's just much more complex basically to capture the physical world and predict the physical world.
Another question? Yeah, Scott? Oh, you got a microphone coming right behind you.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So I've been away from the transportation world and the city government world for a bit. So I might be asking a question that's been asked and answered many times. But one of the observations I had kind of moving from public to private and from, kind of specifically into the tech world was it's like speaking a totally different language. And I was reflecting on Jen Palka, the Code for America founder, had a thing come out probably a year ago that kind of like looked at how many product managers or people who had product management in their title in the federal government. It was under 10 out of millions and millions of people. So I'm curious, I think for Andrew and Millicent and Marcel, like, how much are you guys thinking about, like, what are the jobs and skills that folks have, and like, do the position descriptions even exist for you all to engage with technology companies in a way that's, kind of fruitful?
So that you can begin to speak similar languages.
Yeah, it's like speaking German and Spanish,
yeah.
Right?
And even to a certain extent, as maybe as minute as it seems, like job titles even matter in that regard, because that's almost the first entry point for the conversation. So Marcel, as the Deputy Chief Innovation Officer for the for LA Metro, yeah, go ahead.
So welcome back, Scott. I think I remember talking about this when I was in the thick of it at the city of Los Angeles. I think my presentation was like begging, budgeting, and borrowing staff to create like a data science team, right? And it was, I got into those weeds of reading the classifications, and there was no thing at all close to talking about data science, right? The classification was a list of like old school software backgrounds, all these classifications. But in spite of that, I think we were working at the time with some very, forward-thinking individuals trying to address that problem. And I think it came around about very slow, and I think probably suffered, right? Kind of the burn and churn of like people just saying, okay, I've taken it as far as I can, right? But I think things like Code for America were like, I think, proving grounds for a lot of young people, like civic-minded tech folks, to really kind of come into government and make a difference. I feel like we've probably lost a little bit of that like push that we had at one point in time, because I think it definitely comes from the top, and that civil service upgrading and changes, it takes a long time, right? And it's something that unless folks have kind of a charismatic kind of leader pushing that, I think it ends up being a challenge, right? At LA Metro, we're a huge organization, and I think a lot of our IT stuff tends to be kind of the traditional back of house work. But then you find folks with these kind of more product management like skill sets that they've developed on their own, right? Through, again, I still see like the people who are really kind of leading edge, and I'm thinking about Nina Kim, who works for us, who's also on the board of of Mobility Data, right? Like they are still doing volunteerism, right? Like transportation camps and bringing folks in, but they're not at the senior level yet, right? And so like I think once those folks start kind of jumping in, the other person that I think a lot about that folks know is like Hunter Owens, who helped us kind of really launch the mobility data specification. He's now working at the state, right? And he's like in line at any point for being a chief technology officer somewhere, right? In government. And it's like that type of thing where it's like you have folks who are just doing the work, grinding, and then it's not until they get into until they learn all the and spend all of the thankless work understanding procurement or understanding civil service, right? And now they're at the thing where they're like, oh, okay, I know how to operationalize what I need to do and how to figure out these positions, right? And so I think, but there's still a need, right? There's still totally a need, and I think it's just slow, right? And so that's why a lot of times you've also started popping up, or you see folks understanding the power and the importance of the private sector to kind of, again, right, like take the big data and help you kind of draw the line on the insights, right? And so that becomes very appealing because it's like, well, okay, even if I get the position approved, how long is it going to take me to fill the position? And so, and now we're in another recession, so we're going to actually just clear all these vacancies, right? And then you have to start over. And so it's like we had built all this momentum, and then we lost all of it, right? But I am proud to say that like folks that I brought on to my team in the city of LA are still there doing it and are now experts, right? And so again, right, it's like, but it's not at the scale that we had envisioned or that we would have wanted. And so I think it's just, that's
Millicent, so from, in Portland, are you trying to hire more product managers or more data scientists or software engineers?
Yes. There, that's your answer. Right now, the staff that we have that's working on data, many of them joined the organization under a different classification or job description. And so you have Jacob, who's amazing at the work, but is described in our HR system as, senior planner or something like that. And then we do have data analysts, data scientists that are in our Office of Strategy and Innovation. But that is a part of our organization that has kind of limped along because, as has been mentioned, you have to have the vision from a particular point of influence to ensure that the things are happening. And so it's not to suggest that I don't think it's important, and I'm not using this as an excuse, but I just got there, and we're filling a $32 million budget gap. So sorry I can't focus there as succinctly as I would like, but it is still something that we are making sure that we are thinking about, again, as an innovator, as a public agency. But it is challenging to define the space, refine the space, identify the space within your organization where it should live, how much influence it will have over all of the decision making, which in a place like a local government, people get pretty protective of their stuff. And so you have these young upstarts coming in and telling us how to do our stuff. They don't love that so much. So you have to have someone who's willing to go in and help to ease the relationship and the tension between what's new and necessary and what's existing and necessary. And how do we cause the newer and necessary thing to bring out the best of what's already existing. It's incredibly challenging when you have financial constraints. It's incredibly challenging when you have political winds that blow in various and sundry directions at any given point in a day. But I think it is important to have a general opportunity and ability to focus on what's most important and identifying people who do have an interesting passion and interest in seeing their city or their government or their state work well, but defining the role, even though we may know what we're looking for specifically, helping HR and those larger bureaucratic systems understand that this isn't that, this is new, and you can do something different. Really does also require somebody who, as I shared in a conversation yesterday, I just get up and go downstairs and say, move this to here. That's how that should work. Everybody can't do that, I recognize, but there are a lot of me's around too who are willing to go and do that for their organizations.
So Villanova, Automotus, two technology companies, We just heard from, on kind of the public sector perspective, that there needs to be an ongoing change and conversation about the ability of bringing more staff and expertise, even kind of the job titles and classifications, to be able to relate to this kind of conversation of big data, relate to the work you do more directly. As technology companies, how easy is it for you to attract the data scientists, the software developers, the product managers that you need to do your work? And is this a problem that it's not just the public sector having a challenge? Is this a kind of a bigger challenge of workforce readiness or workforce development?
Yeah, well, it's if you asked me that question during the Great Resignation, I would tell you we couldn't we couldn't hire anybody. It was just almost impossible to hire anybody. And interesting enough, software developers, I started calling them like, next to like, brain surgeons, they were software developers at the time. Literally, they felt and walked around as important as those folks. But there definitely exists a gap, and it's interesting how we see it. And and the gap is really not around the talent; it's just really around the knowledge. Most of the colleagues in in the municipal sectors or in the city partners we work with, they have talent, but the problem is they've never worked under a product environment. What do? You're basically generating all this data. You now have multiple products, and then the products now do what? Now they're impacting your constituents. So they've gone from thinking constituency services to now constituency experience, and the experience is the user. Their constituents now become a user of a product, and that using of that product becomes significant for them because it could be front page news if it doesn't work, right? So that knowledge gap, or it's not really talent, but it's really knowledge that someone can train you. Like, hey, you have a product. This is what you do with a product, and this is the journey of taking a product from from a user perspective, and that's where there is a gap. And absolutely, it's still difficult to hire knowledgeable people in the space, but we're finding cities hiring folks. You come into conversation and you're talking to someone who has a product background and understand now you're into the user experience, and that's really where success is going to come from that gap.
That's good to hear. Thibaut?
Yeah, I would just double on what you said. Like I think it's been complex, and it's been more and more expensive to find the right talent, which is driving cost for startups and tech companies in general. I think I would say the highest complexity is more on the PM role, so the product manager, because that's I think in our world, like, we all understand the weeds of transportation and mobility, etc. But to get into that space, but also to talk the language of the engineers, it's challenging, and there's always this tension, between the let's say the commercial part and the engineering part, and and sort of the clients and the engineering part, and how do you build and have people basically that understand, how to talk to engineers, but also like how to translate requirements in sort of use cases into product requirements and to technical requirements. I think that's the biggest complex. So those PM roles are complex and difficult to find, especially in our space.
Yeah. So even before you can tell the story, you have to have the staff to understand how to collect, how to use the data, how to actually turn it into something that's actionable. All right, so you may have guessed that it's not by accident that we have a panel with kind of two representatives from the public sector, two representatives from the private sector, because when you're talking about data and mobility and transportation, you can't talk about one side of this discussion without having the other. In many ways, it's symbiotic. In many ways, one needs the other. But also, there's still a lot of challenges in working together. There's a lot of data that's generated and owned by the public sector. It's not necessarily easy to share with the private sector or even share with other public agencies. There's even more data, as we know, that's generated by the private sector that's not easily shared into the public sector or shared between companies. And so how can we tell a more complete story about the value of this information and about the change we want to effect without kind of the complete picture? So here's the question. How can we collectively foster greater collaboration between the public and private sectors to address some of the concerns that we know are out there, and whether they're safety, whether it's equity, whether it's the climate change challenges, without having a more complete picture of the data. So how can we foster greater collaboration? How can we share better? How can we go back to our kindergarten roots and say, listen, this is all data that ultimately, regardless of where it came from, is serving a greater purpose. So that's a good. Romy, let's start with you and then, and go from there.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that, when I worked at in the mobile payment sector, it was interesting, how much of that data we wanted to share with some of our clients, and some of our clients, refused to share that data with anyone, including the municipal sector, right? So private sector, et cetera. And part of it is because a lot of the data is competitive, and it gives them a competitive advantage or disadvantage. Therefore, because it is transactional data, because it is, data that is basically details their business model, it becomes very, very difficult. And you work with, in the public sector, and you do have private sector, but when you talk to, in our case, operators who have, who own 50% of the other side of the market, and they're not sharing any of that data, then it becomes very, very difficult for, the public sector to start to anticipate, how things are going to behave and how things are going to evolve. It's because, again, they refuse or they see that as a competitive advantage or disadvantage. So we got to get to a space where some of that key data has to enter the market. It could be anonymized, it could be somehow, but it's got to be a point where, both sectors agree that has to be shared. And I think in the end, it's going to be government who is going to basically dictate, what has to be shared or not in order to improve specifically the modality space.
A little more a government mandate. So Thibaut, Villanova has a really valuable road safety data platform. And you talked about some of the facts and figures there from London. I would imagine you're having to pull data, you're having to source data from a number of different private sources. They may be in different formats, they may not be kind of well integrated, probably public sources as well. So kind of similar question to you, how do we get better collaboration in this space around data that may be privately generated but is ultimately serving a public good?
Yes, so for instance, like to give an example, like we started with TfL our work on road safety January 2023, and we got the detailed collisions data, not the sort of the open data one, but the detailed collision data in January 2024, so a year after. And so the reason is, first of all, like this data was difficult to obtain, et cetera, but there's also just a mistrust to push data into a private environment, and so I think that sort of the data sharing and pushing data into to a private company, I think has been a challenge. So we worked through that challenge, and we tried to establish the right trust around that. I think the value of also like using like a third-party data processor is that you, in some ways, like also like offload the privacy risk to this data processor and data controller, which is external, and anything regarding connected vehicle data or location-based services data are indirect personal data and are under the privacy protection law. So that's what I see as the way you would work with a third-party partner. But generally, like I believe this type of ecosystem, like CoMotion, helps a lot because it also helps establishing relationship and trust, and also like look at in a non-transactional way of how we can actually co-create use cases with the data and have this sort of fruitful conversation. So I think having these types of ecosystem and environment, I think, plays a big role.
Millicent, thoughts on greater collaboration between the public and private sectors around data sharing?
Sure. So we have a SMART grant that we received, $2 million, and in the city of Portland, we will be the first city to deliver on a zero emissions delivery zone, 5-block zone within the central city that's focused on ensuring that all of the delivery drivers, whether they're in vehicles or using cargo bikes or whatever, are zero emissions. In order for us to do that, there is no world in which we would not be partnering with the private sector to gather information. What is required for us to be able to be successful in delivering on that is the agreements between the organizations that are party to the relationship that define the use of the data, define the sharing of the data. As you can imagine, we have all the competitors in that space in terms of delivery. It's FedEx, it's UPS, it's DHL, it's USPS. In fact, the Postal Service office is the main one, is in the 5-block zone. So that's fun. And then you also have the Amazons and the Uber Eats and the Lyfts, and I mean it's really quite an intricate web that we've woven for ourselves. But as webs are strong, this will be strong as well. And but it's strengthened by the relationships and, frankly, the definition of the terms around how that data will be used and shared, and the limitations of it as well. I think people are very concerned about the limitations of, or the implications of the lack of limitation. So we have to have those individual agreements and then a master agreement that informs how we're going to move that work forward. But it's not impossible, but it is not without its challenges. And it requires not just a singular entity's push to have it, and by singular entity I mean the Bureau. The city has to be behind it, because it really ultimately becomes something that will be owned by the city as its responsibility, so the liability is then shared as well. So it's the risks of going into those types of relationships, but the reward is going to be, in our view, so great that going forward people will see it. I mean, but we have to have an example. We need to give people a sample of the really good meal that you're going to get at the end. Without that taste, we won't be able to replicate that type of thing across the city.
Marcel, the Office of Innovation and within LA Metro, even going back to your time with the city of LA, this notion of public-private collaboration around not just projects, but also the necessity for data sharing there. What have you found that what's worked, or I mean, there are a lot of scars, I'm sure, but is there anything, any items or efforts that you can identify of what's worked?
Well, I think you talked a little bit about it, and I think it's like you talked about the stick approach, right? Like, mandates to share, because I feel like data sharing, it just almost seems like very like, oh yeah, data sharing, yeah, here you go, here's some data sharing, right? Like, but let's be real clear, right? Like, what is the incentive for the private sector who is trying to build a product or trying to sell? Like, they have to sell their product. They're not just like, hey, here's some. Or they have to figure out a way, right, to monetize it in some other way. And so I think that we spent a lot of time trying to like have these, hey, yeah, let's do like an MOU, but that didn't work a lot of times, right? It's not until you actually regulate, and be really clear about why you're doing the regulation. But then also, I think you also have to create opportunities to also like the carrot. Right. And so, I think in some of the early, I forget what the term is, but, people can make using your data and they getting data from other cities, and that creates more insights and they can refine their model, right? Like you being open to understanding that would happen. But I think we also have to kind of help the private sector define use cases, right? And so I would be remiss to not remind folks that the Summer Games are coming to Los Angeles in 2028. You all are invited. Please come. And I think that is something that we're coordinating out of the Office of Strategic Innovation, that approach. For those of you who don't know, the Summer Games are like having 7 Super Bowls a day for 2 weeks, and then taking a break and then doing it again. So maybe 5 Super Bowls a day for the Paralympics. It will be the largest peacetime gathering in the history of the United States, maybe in the globe, right? And so we have been really hard at work trying to define the problem set in a games that, because of security reasons, parking will not be readily available at the venues. And so we have to figure out how to get spectators and workforce to these venues using our existing transit system, but then also standing up a supplemental bus system double the size of our current system. So that's like kind of the big piece. And we're using traditional like modeling to like kind of look at that and how to kind of define that. We have Olympic experts from the 2012 games and from all this different things. We'll be in Paris this summer, a cohort of us trying to understand and really kind of bring that knowledge back. But I think, we're really interested in also the private sector, right? Like what is the use cases that we need to kind of define? And the good thing is we've already established at Metro, our predecessors developed an unsolicited proposal process. And so there is a clear way, and a clear signal to the private sector about how we would receive proposals and what our standards are for those. And so, but I think one of the things that we're thinking about is that how do we actually take the momentum and actually do like kind of like a public discourse about it, right? And engage the private sector, and then really try to understand what is the role for data sharing. And I think I was thinking about kind of where we're at, and we've had some conversations with several of you, like at the various events. It's like like this momentum that existed 3 years ago, 4 years ago, right? There's clearly venture capital is in a different position right now around this work. There wasn't the disruption that scooters brought that like really made cities like, oh, we got to deal with this and we got to figure it out. And there was all this momentum, and then just the great work that OMF is doing. It's like we know that we have stewards and folks like Millicent and other people doing the work, but I think we have to kind of figure out what is that next urgency that we have to do, because clearly climate change isn't enough. Like the earth burning isn't enough. We're just getting stewed right slowly. And so what is that catalytic moment that can happen? And I think we're just looking at the games as how do we use that and leverage it to try to create some excitement. And I think after the summer, all eyes will be on us, in good and bad, right?
Well, yeah, I'm the eternal optimist. It's what gets me up in the morning. So I look to the future here, and we're out of time. But I wanted to. My next question was going to be like, what excites you? What do you see as like a positive future for the use of big data in our cities and in our communities? But I do think the future is bright in regards to the opportunities to tell the stories that are most important to affect the change. And whether that's trying to make streets safer or address climate change, improve equity, I think we have the understanding that data needs to drive a lot of that storytelling. So I want to thank you, Marcel, Millicent, Thibaut, Romy, for being a part of the conversation here today. Thank you for participating in the Open Mobility Foundation and our collaborative approach of bringing the public and private sector together to try to address these challenges. And with that, please give my panelists here a round of applause.
Thank you all very much. And then fun fact, I was actually on that team of early morning auditors for scooters that Marcel talked about earlier. So I remember those days well. And so we are so glad you are here for our last panel of CoMotion. I'm going to invite onto the stage our new Director of Strategy at CoMotion, who will be leading this conversation. Leading our next conversation. Oh, sorry. Well, while they're doing that, our next conversation will be soaring safely, security for the future of air transportation. And so we'll be talking about AAM and eVTOLs and how to make sure that it's a safe mode and the experience from getting the intermodal connections is one that customers will find efficient and pleasant. So once we get the speakers off the stage, we'll start that. And then as a final reminder, please join us here at the end for our closing and for a little celebration with Prosecco and some yummy snacks, and we'll see you then.
Whirlwind tour. All right, thank you all. Mike. Thank you all for being here for the last session of an absolutely amazing couple of days. We do appreciate you being here for our Soaring Safely conversation. We do know it's been a long day yesterday, but a great start today with some great conversations, and we're ending it with something that's very, very important because the future is a lot closer than people think. And so, again, I'm Vivian Martinez. I'm the Director of Strategy for CoMotion, and excited to have this opportunity to talk about advanced air mobility because it's right around the corner. The Jetsons cartoon was a long time ago, and people think there's no way we'll ever get there, but I think we're getting closer every day, and this panel of experts is going to really explain how security is going to be an important part of this. So I'm going to allow everyone to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. Why don't you go ahead, John?
Hi, I'm John Murphy. I'm the Senior Director of Security Policy with Supernal. We are part of the Hyundai Motor Group, and we are the electric aviation arm. It's nice to meet you.
Michael.
Good afternoon. Michael Rosinski. I just retired from the Transportation Security Administration and started my own consulting company assisting the advanced air mobility industry with security concerns and regulations.
All right, and Michael number 2.
Hi, I'm Michael Schnerla. I'm the Director of Open Source Operations for the Open Mobility Foundation. My background is in technology and project management, everything from cities to Fortune 500 companies, startups, and now at the Open Mobility Foundation nonprofit.
Great. So we've got a little bit of everything here in the room to help address the important issue of security in the future of advanced air mobility. And I want to start with Michael Rosinski, if you don't mind. So tell us a little bit about your position previously in the government, how you helped lay the framework and groundwork for what we're looking towards the future, and how we get the different partners to the table to make this a reality.
Sure, it's a lot. So in the Transportation Security Administration, we started looking at AAM, again, long before it was a thing, quote unquote. We saw what happened with unmanned aerial systems and drones and things like that. That snuck up on the federal government, I can tell you, rather rapidly. So when we started to see AAM on the horizon, we didn't want the same thing to happen there. So among other things, I had started the Advanced Air Mobility Working Group within the TSA, and we started working with other federal agencies. Folks may be aware that last spring, the Department of Transportation started an interagency working group across the entire federal government to look at AAM. TSA was on there. I was on that working group as well. And a big part of it was helping the new stakeholders, again, the new OEMs and operators that may not have had prior airline experience, to understand what it is, that regulatory landscape that they were about to enter. Now, certainly everybody understands that the FAA is their first hurdle, get the aircraft certified, get civil operations approved. Shortly after that, depending on what their operation is going to be, the TSA becomes their next regulatory hurdle, again, depending on their operations. So we spent a couple of years working with the industry, whether that be OEMs, operators, airports, vertiports, to try and see what are these new vehicles, where do they fit into the existing landscape, what may change because of the massive change that the industry is bringing about with these new vehicles, new locations for operations, non-traditional operations. So that's really what we started to do. That work continues, I can tell you. And like I said, I left in December and then started my own company in January, and they're very, very interested. I've been very busy. It's a good thing. There's a lot of work to do. A lot remains to be seen, and we're learning from the industry as people are, again, looking at this innovation. What does that mean on the government side? Again, the government does not move at light speed, shocker. So the more advanced notice and collaboration we have with industry, or the government has, I have to stop saying we, the more collaboration that exists there, the better, because there's certainly an amount of lead time necessary.
So, so John, if you can tell me from your perspective and Supernal's perspective, looks like Michael did a lot of work in getting that framework started. Obviously a long way to go, but I think folks may be surprised how far along the way we are. From your perspective, how do you collaborate with the government, and what do you see are some of the next steps to help be partners with government to make this a reality?
I'm actually part of the government regulations team. So, you know, the great part, and Mike was actually the chair before he retired, was they have formed forums for us to get together and coordinate and collaborate. The Aviation Security Advisory Council, Subcommittee for Advanced Air Mobility, that's a big word, is one of the better security forums to get together, collaborate, and talk about how we come together and make a secure environment for advanced air mobility. And, you know, a lot of, you know, security professionals, they don't tend to talk to each other a lot. It's just part of the nature of being a security officer. But when we come together, it's interesting that we're all thinking along the same lines in terms of how we're going to secure advanced air mobility. And I think digital identity management is a big part of it. Layered security is a big part of it. The development of our air navigation service provider is going to be a big part of it. So, meaning the regulations that already exist, there hasn't been a lot of change in terms of the regulation with respect to incorporating advanced air mobility into the national air system. But you've got to be able to adapt, and you do that in cooperation with, you know, in our case, TSA, FAA, DOE, a lot of stakeholders that are partners of ours.
And so customer acceptance is obviously going to be an important part of the success of air mobility, advanced air mobility. And there's a lot still to be determined on what that's going to look like, whether you're going through a regular standard airport, you know, that international airport that folks are used to, an FBO, fixed base operator. How do you think that, or what are you trying to do to minimize the friction there and make it as easy as possible, but obviously important, very secure for part of the process?
Yeah, that's a good question. Friction or less friction. We're all pretty well traveled people, I think, in this room, probably all part of the TSA's Trusted Traveler Program that reduces friction. You've all got the apps on your phone that reduces friction. Hopefully you're all part of Global Entry that reduces friction. As you're coming through the lines in TSA, now you're getting a biometrically a red as you're coming through to ensure that you are the person that's actually traveling and not somebody else with respect to that person's name. So there's a lot of things that are being incorporated, and it's all about biometric, or it's all about digital identity management. I think that's how we're going to do it and make for a less friction movement within advanced air mobility. So I think to put it into a concept, I'm an OEM. I'm not an operator, but we're going to be very close partners with our operators, and we do have a lot of input, and we do a lot of concept work in terms of what the security is going to look like, and it will be layered. I think it all starts, and we all came to the same conclusion at these ASAC meetings, which is it all starts with an account. And it all starts with putting responsible people into the national airspace. I don't think we want irresponsible people up there, other than our children. And it all starts with developing an account. I think if you've got a TTP, a Trusted Travel Program, we start you off with, you know, you go straight to the account. If you don't have a TTP, or you're part of the TTP, then probably a quick background check through LexisNexis based on criteria that the operator decides that you need. And then once you've got the account established, it's going to be something similar to an Uber, where you're using your biometric information that's attached to your account. I think what we see in a mature system, a mature ecosystem for advanced air mobility, is you know, a ground transportation system, whether it be autonomous or whether it be a company that's attached to the vertiport coming to pick you up. That in turn would be an extended access control portal right there where it would identify you biometrically. You get in, that becomes a sanitized space, takes you to the vertiport. You get to skip the public access area, go directly in through screening. High-tech screening takes you through very quickly. Don't have to take your shoes off, don't have to pull the keys out of your pocket. It's able to identify knife-edge weapons or any kind of ballistics. Gets you through very quickly. If you've got luggage, it goes its separate way, and you make your way through a very smart infrastructure to your gate. Gate knows who you are, probably reading, you know, radio frequency information from your credit card, knows who you are, what your wants and desires are. Get yourself a cafe mocha on the way to the gate, and then the gate again reads you through biometrics to send you on your way to the aircraft, to the next vertiport, and then egress very smartly and efficiently on your way out to the public.
Well, that was easy. That's a great segue to Michael. That's a lot of data, it sounds like, that will be part of this process. So tell us from your perspective what you think you know, that data collection is going to look like, how cities are involved. So, you know, there's a lot of players that need to be considered in this. So why don't we talk a little bit about the data portion of staying secure?
Yeah, I'll talk about data and maybe the city's role. So I think, you know, this has been on city's radar for years. LA DOT put out a report in 2021 about advanced air mobility, even mentioning the mobility data specification, which is the blueprint of data sharing that we create at the OMF. And so cities know this is coming. Cities are not sure when exactly it's coming or how it's going to come. And then there's obviously the federal regulations, FAA, and there's no doubt in my mind that that'll be handled like perfectly through those federal regulations, just like it's handled with air traffic control and air flight right now. I think the role of cities, cities are looking at this from definitely safety concerns. So thinking about the safety and access to the vertiports that might be in cities. Where are those going to be? Where are they placed? How do people get access? You're going to have it's a different situation than a helicopter landing pad, because in this scenario, you'll probably have more people, more types of people, more people using apps to get on the devices and the flights. So a little bit, I think they're thinking you're going to have to ratchet up the security to a level that you have in air travel usually, but at different points around your whole city. And then cities are also thinking about equity around this, flight paths, noise, things like that. And part of that, I think, is going to be, when we get to the data part of it, is currently when you have a heliport, there's some conditional use permit for operating that. I think cities are going to want that for all the vertiports or maybe converted heliports with some data sharing attached to it. Like, how many times are things coming and landing and taking off from this location? Where are they headed? What are sort of the general flight paths? What are the limits of those, like maybe setting operating hours, things like that. And MDS allows that two-way, you know, push the digital rules out, but also collect the data about those operations. So I think that's where cities are going to play the biggest part, and where this data sharing is going to come in is through those vertiports. I mean, it may come in a little bit if there's a flight path over a city, even if there's not even, or an area, even if there's not a vertiport in that jurisdiction, potentially, depending on the heights, I think, of those flights. And I think the other way that cities are thinking about this, you know, we talk about this a lot with robo-taxis now, using MDS for this, is pushing out emergency response information to the people operating. So, you know, if there's, let's say, a house fire or an emergency situation on the ground of any type, or maybe a threat of some sort, the FAA is not necessarily going to know about that or change too much about the flight paths, because they're usually operating well above that level. But a city might want to say, let people know there's this chemical emissions, or there's this apartment fire that could affect the flight paths. So let's digitally, proactively, in real time, publish that out as a way, a bit of information for the operators to use when they're determining where to fly and if it's safe to fly.
And so, Mike, looking at Mike Rosinski, looking at how those plans are going, you know, the ones that you helped lay some of the groundwork for and are currently now also assisting on the outside. Like, I imagine this is going to occur in phases. You know, we're not going to, you know, start going from building to building top. I imagine as the first step in this. So what do you see as how this might roll out and how all the pieces have to come in play to kind of grow this industry and make it a reality?
Sure, I can tell you on the government side, there was a big piece of asking industry, what is it that you want to do or plan to do, right? Everybody's familiar with regular airport operations. As John mentioned, everybody here has probably flown, and if you've gone through a regular airport, you are familiar with the normal TSA screening on the security side or what have you. But what a lot of people don't realize, if you're not in the aviation industry, is that there's actually a lot of tiers of security. Okay, so again, as we mentioned, most people are familiar with getting on an aircraft to fly across country to visit family, and they're going through a regular full-size airport, what we would call a Cat X or a Cat 1 airport, your large airports. But there's a lot of other types of aviation operations out there that carry passengers and carry cargo for money, right? They do this for hire. I often ask folks when I'm doing these talks or just having conversations, you know, if you were to name the airlines that you know here domestically in the US and include the cargo companies, everybody will come up with a dozen, maybe two. There's between 600 and 700, right, aircraft operators domestically in the US, and those are the ones that fall under a TSA program. Okay, there's a lot more than that that may move passengers and cargo for hire. They're not all operating at the same level of security you see when you walk through an airport and get screened by TSA. So, depending on what those AAM folks want to do, the OEMs and the operators, there are potentials to not have full TSA screening at like what you would experience as a checkpoint, okay? Most of those aircraft fall under a weight threshold where TSA typically starts its regulatory governance, and that is 12,500 pounds maximum takeoff weight. Most of the vehicles we see coming in the future, or at least the near future for AAM, when we're talking about the electric eVTOLs, are beneath that weight. So if they were not deplaning their passengers, for example, into the sterile area, the area you go after you've been screened, there may not be a whole lot of regulatory requirements right now for them, okay? If they stayed fixed-based operator to fixed-based operator or general aviation airport to general aviation airport where there is no security function there by TSA. That doesn't mean, and I can tell you for sure, and John I'm sure can speak to this, that doesn't mean that the AAM OEMs don't have an interest in security, right? Even if there's no current security requirement for the operation they propose, they have their own interest. We've talked throughout the conference, I know a number of folks have mentioned the idea of public acceptance, okay? Nobody wants to see, for a variety of obvious reasons, one of these aircraft suffer some sort of issue, okay, and go down, and if it's a security-related issue, they have their own concerns to protect their passengers, protect their aircraft, protect their crew, ground crew, what have you, even if government regulations haven't caught up yet. So that's where it has gotten interesting. So again, depending on what those look like, depends on what they're going to do, depends on where they want to go. And again, the whole idea of non-traditional operations where maybe there's no airport at all. Again, maybe we build a vertiport from scratch. Maybe we're using a park and ride, okay, in a government location or a municipality, a parking garage, what have you. And now that does bring other security questions, okay? When I land an aircraft that's running passenger operations and I keep it in an airport, there's a general requirement for certain types of security and so forth. But now what if these things, they're not going airport to airport, they're going parking garage to parking garage in and around a city? Well, how do you secure that aircraft overnight now, okay, so that it's protected from any type of tampering or what have you? That now brings in a whole other security concern that we really haven't dealt with before. And those are the type of things that are literally being worked as we speak.
That's perfect to my next question, which really is essentially that. So John, tell us, what are the considerations that from your side of the table, you want to make sure that you're addressing as a company, things that you're thinking about they may have been things that we have not considered in the past, like what Mike just described, overnight security in an area that, you know, we're used to being in airports and that sort of thing. So, you know, what from your company's perspective, you want to make sure you bring to the table solutions that will make sure this is successful?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. More than likely, operators will start off as a Part 135, and it will be under a 12.5 program. So, really, but that necessarily is a situation for opportunity in bringing in less friction and allowing more of a digitized space with the use of a layered security approach utilizing biometrics. So, I mean, there are going to be challenges. I mean, the challenges are going to be balancing the speed with security, as Mike pointed out. We're going to have to harmonize AAM security with existing airport security systems. So there will be upgrades. We have to think about scalability. I mean, you can only bring this so fast. I think there's going to be a very high demand for this technology, but you can only be able to bring it on so quickly. Technology can be your Achilles heel. That something always goes wrong, so you better have a backup plan when the technology doesn't work the way you want it to, especially in the onset of this.
So imagine there's so many unknowns that you're trying to factor in and
Sure.
have the backup plan for the backup plan.
Yep. And there's cost and resource management that goes along with all this. You need to maintain an effective security program, but at the same time, you can't break the bank, and you got to keep those lines moving. So a lot of challenges there.
So let's talk a little bit again more about data. Michael, if you can tell me, you talked a little bit about the city's perspective. What are the other considerations in working maybe with the industry that you want to make sure that you're part of the discussion and part of having a seat at the table to help this all roll out?
Well, I think an interesting thing, so we've been at the OMF maybe thinking about this seriously for about a year. We've had a few public meetings about it. And you can find a lot of this online. Everything we do is in the open. I noticed on the slide here I have open under my name 3 times, which is a lot. So we've had 2 public meetings about this with Eve Air Mobility is one of our members, and some other cities that are interested in this, specifically Orlando, SFMTA, San Francisco, LADOT, Miami-Dade as well, county. So we've been having these discussions, and I think one thing, an interesting thing maybe that's come out of this is, we typically work with transportation departments in cities and MPOs and other places. A lot of the permitting that's being done on the heliports currently is not really through the transportation department typically. It's through the land use department, and they're doing their permitting that way. So many of our contacts in the transportation space, this is sort of like not their realm and not on it's on their radar, but they don't necessarily have direct jurisdiction over it. So that's something that we're trying to work on to allow our DOT people to connect with the right people in their city that manage the current heliports, and potentially rewrite the heliport regulations, because many of the regulations and the permitting for this is back in the 60s and 70s. It hasn't changed since then, so it needs to be updated, and for a city to be effective, they've got to update this to accommodate these future travel modes. So that's like something that's come out of many of these discussions.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the work initially with the OMF and kind of where it came to be from is a lot of the bike share and scooter share and being able to manage that. So that was a new industry, moving at light speed, kind of making up rules as we go type of thing. This, some may say, is something similar to the next big thing on the horizon. So what lessons learned, or what can you translate from, where you started to how things are evolving?
Yeah, we definitely started with scooters and bike share, and since then, 2 years ago we started thinking about other modes of transportation, and over a year ago, we had an official update to the specification that included a lot of other modes and the ability to add new modes in the future. So it now includes robo-taxis, regular taxis, Uber and Lyft, sidewalk delivery robots, car share, all sorts of bike and scooter form factors and things like that. Plus, we have another data spec about the curb, so curb access, which actually urban air mobility maybe fits into this as a kind of a curb, but a vertical curb for parking and transactions. So I think that we're going that way, and urban air mobility as part of MDS, and really MDS is like this it creates this frictionless exchange of information that can be replicable and scalable to lots of different cities, regardless of what sort of operator you are. Cities see this same thing applying to AAM as it has for all these other modes. And so MDS is about, I'd say, 90% of the way to supporting this. It does have some 3D verticality already in the spec. It has some of the language needed. I think some of the vehicle form factors need to be added and some more 3D sort of policy, digital policy. But cities are thinking, let's iterate and do the next version of MDS. So we're on MDS 2.0 right now. We're already thinking of 2.1, which is a minor release, and it's only a minor release because we will be able to add support for advanced air mobility to MDS in the near future. So that's on our roadmap for all of our cities and our private sector members as well. And another part of that 2.1 release is going to be emergency response, safety, and on the ground level and probably AAM level too, more information about incidents, crashes, things like that we hadn't been able to really capture in the scooter landscape. But now with connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and AAM, certainly that stuff is available more in real time and in more detail later on. So that's where we're thinking, that's where cities have their head with this sharing.
And John, you had mentioned there's going to be a lot of needs for updates in technology. Not really sure, the rules are kind of still being written, but what do you envision some of those technology updates or physical updates needed to current airports or infrastructure things to get this moving in the right direction?
Yeah, and this is a good question for our FAA representative at the company. But I will tell you that really, in the future, where the business model will take full effect is when you develop an air navigation service provider that is going to tether all of these aircraft, link all of these aircraft, great situational awareness, where you're able to put a large amount of these aircraft along tethered routes from one point to another. So when that technology evolves, and it's evolving through the FAA Next Gen, through DoD, and through NASA with a lot of input, I think that's when you can really see the business model flourish. Mm-hmm. Until now, it's going to be getting the infrastructure established, and I think that's going to be, through FBOs and existing infrastructures that are out there that we can take advantage of.
I'll ask you the same question, Mike. What do you think are some of the technological or infrastructure changes or updates that need to be happening?
Sure, I think one of the newest things when you're talking about the AAM vehicles that are coming into play here, and kind of an unknown from previous manufacturing, is the whole cybersecurity issue, especially as we push closer to unmanned aircraft, unpiloted. What is that going to mean from the security perspective? Certainly there's a safety perspective, and FAA has always handled that when we talk about certifying the aircraft. But there's a little twist when you start talking about cybersecurity, right? And TSA, obviously post 9/11, had taken over the security aspects of aviation. FAA maintained safety and airspace. Cybersecurity is an interesting kind of overlap there, because again, it's still FAA responsible for the aircraft itself and making sure that aircraft gets certified and everything, all the avionics and the new equipment that's being used are certified by FAA. But now if I talk about a security attack, right, somebody who's specifically trying to attack that system, now we go from safety to security, and TSA is looking there as well. What's our role there, and what is all of this new equipment, okay, new aircraft? Obviously, there's a lot of off-the-shelf, quote-unquote, things that'll maybe stay the same for quite some time when we talk about nav and comm systems. But we also know that, especially, again, as we move towards unmanned and remote operations, that could change. And what are the security requirements and concerns there? Folks that have been watching aviation over the past year or two may have realized that over in foreign countries, there's been attacks on GPS systems where passenger aircraft are up in the air and all of a sudden their GPS is taking them to places they did not plan to go. So that is just one small example on the technology side.
And as we're getting close to wrapping up our session, I want to go back to the consumer acceptance and understanding what that conversation and education needs to be. So John, tell me from your perspective what you think are important steps.
That's a good question, and I like it because I can take my security hat off and kind of put my my pilot hat on. I started off professionally as a Marine Corps pilot, and then I moved into customs, and then eventually into customs aviation. So I've got a lot of flight time with Sikorsky products, with King Airs that are ISR birds, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance operations. A lot of operations with Citation jets that have been morphed with F-16 radars. So a lot of tactical flying, and I was also a maintenance test pilot. So when you get when you educate the pilot, whether it be through social media or whether it be through other means on the internet or getting out here to speak with wonderful people, I can tell you that these aircraft are just over-engineered. It's amazing. Some of the materials that they're using, incredibly high strength. They can take on an incredible amount of Gs that will not be required for this mission set. And redundant systems, our aircraft, I can only speak for Supernal, but you're talking about 8 independently operated engines. That's very redundant. So engine malfunctions aren't going to be an issue. It's going to have flight control systems that are redundant. It's going to have the ability to pick up a target in front of you through different radar systems called due regard. You can pick up a duck from 25 miles out. So great situational awareness inside the aircraft. It's going to be flying along an air navigation service provider. It's, again, great situational awareness with respect. So I think the more you know about the aircraft and how it's going to be incorporated into a system, it gives you just a great deal of confidence in flying in advanced air mobility. It really should be one of the safest aircraft ever produced.
Any thoughts?
Sure, I think it's no shock to people that you probably have friends or family that are nervous flyers. There are a lot of people that just inherently don't really like to fly. Even, again, in large tested aircraft that have been around for many, many decades. So now we're bringing in new aircraft, and even for people that have flown all their lives, if they're nervous flyers, a lot of people have never in their lives been on a helicopter, right? So now we're introducing this mode of transportation via AAM that is going to be an eVTOL, similar to a helicopter type of operation. And for the nervous flyers especially, and perhaps even folks that are seasoned flyers, don't want to be the first necessarily, right? So when you're then talking about, again, as we mentioned before, that acceptance, that safety and security, that becomes a big piece of it because you already may have a hard sell with some of your customers just because it's new, right? So you certainly don't want safety or security issues lumped onto that. Something in yesterday's newspaper or news feed of a problem with these things that took place. So that is why, as I mentioned earlier, that regardless of the safety or security regulations that these new vehicles are walking into, and even if the government hasn't caught up to the safety and security requirements, these OEMs have their own interest in doing it anyway, and they're doing that. I can tell you that, again, when I was with the government, as we were genning this up and starting these working groups, they were coming to us. It's not usual to have the regulated come to the regulator, knocking on the door, right? It's normally the other way around, but that hasn't been the case with AAM, and to John's point, because of the interest in safety and security, regardless of whether or not regs have caught up yet, that has been a big concern for operators and OEMs. So again, I think it's a good thing all the way around.
And I think data can always tell a story. So let's hear from your perspective how you think data can be leveraged in this perspective, in boosting consumer confidence.
Yeah, and even before data, when you think about like public acceptance of this technology, I think cities want to see this succeed, so they want to see it happen. But talking to some cities, they're nervous in the way that they were nervous about scooters. Scooters showed up and people didn't really understand them and they were not regulated, and council people said if you can't get them under control. We're just going to ban them from the city, and that happened in a number of places. And similarly now with robo-taxis, we're in a similar situation there. Some cities have been preempted from doing any sort of regulation, and so that has caused some problems and then a little bit of public backlash. I think cities want to avoid that with advanced air mobility, and part of the data sharing and the two-way communication can help with that, because cities have this knowledge, this institutional knowledge of just how their cities operate, what's good for the residents, what's how flight paths and noise, audible noise and visual noise can affect the entire city landscape and experience of the residents, who's being served by the vehicles, et cetera. So I think that data sharing helps allow that to happen, allow it to scale, allow it to be successful in more and more cities. And so I think that's where the data comes in. It's really more of a way to help make that frictionless operation happen. And the data is useful for that, but that is a bigger policy in how you run a city type of situation, more important than the data in many ways.
So final thoughts as we're wrapping up here, and ask the audience to prepare any questions. We will have a few minutes for that. But John, any final thoughts about, again, security for the future of air transportation, how we can make this a reality?
Well, just to jump on top of what these gents were saying, a rising tide lifts all boats in this space. What's good for competition is good for us. We want everyone to succeed, and collaboration is going to be paramount. So we're in it all together. There's plenty of space for everybody, and we want to see everybody do well.
Love it.
I'd echo the collaboration statement, and I think it's been going very, very well, actually, over the past couple of years, to the point where, again, as I mentioned, it's no shock to everybody. The government is typically slower to move than private sector, but there was a point also where the government was now asking private sector, okay, we're ready. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? It was nice to be ahead of that curve for a change. So continued collaboration in that respect, I would say, is the key point.
Good. Anything else to add?
The collaboration side of things is very important. That's what we do at the OMF. We have, welcome everyone in the room to follow us. Our meetings are public. We will definitely be talking about this at more public future working group meetings as we have in the past. We also have a workshop coming up, which is going to be at first for OMF members, so the cities that are interested in this and the private companies that are interested in this, to talk about exactly in kind of an MDS data sharing way what cities feel like they need in collaboration with the operators. And then we'll bring that to the public meeting. So I feel like that sort of open discussion online on discussion forums that we have with our proposed fields and code changes, and with our workshops and working groups, I think that's a great way to get involved and get everyone together, so that I guess, I don't know what the analogy is for air, but great updraft rises all planes or something like that.
Why not?
Yeah.
Great. Any questions from the audience in our last closing minutes? Looks like we have solved all the world's problems.
It's been a long day.
Thank you again for taking time to be here today. Thank you for our esteemed panel. And I'll be the first one on any of those flight plans, all right? Let me know.
Let me tell you, I spent 2.5 hours on 95 to get here from Fort Lauderdale. Build these things faster.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Vivian. And now we're about to close, but I did want to reveal the winner. Oh, first a picture. Quick picture, Vivian. So we'll take here. Quick picture. Well, there we are now. Drum rolls. Boom, boom, boom. The winner of the 2024 Miami Mobility Challenge is Aerolane. And I have to say, so Todd Gritz, the CEO, had to leave last night, but I did want to say this was an incredibly close challenge. Hextronics arrived half a point behind. So Kurt, I see you there in the audience. I just wanted to a round of applause to Hextronics as well, because it was incredible close. So you definitely deserve that. And now, well, look, I just wanted to say thank you to all our partners. First of all, obviously Miami-Dade College for hosting us. I see you, Pedro Santos, here, so thank you so much to you and all the team, to Madeleine Pumariega, the president, and it's been such a pleasure to be here, and we really hope to be back next year. A great thank you to the Miami-Dade Department of Transportation Public Works, Ulis, Carlos, Doug, and Julian has just left, but Julian Guevara for all his help, the City of Miami, Miami-Dade County, Mayor Levine Cava, obviously Alejandra from Miami Parking Authority and all her team, and our great partners, HNTB, our leadership partner, thank you so much. You've been a key part of this event, so thank you, Mike, Beth, and Chelsea, and all the team, Eileen as well. Thank you, Moving On and Regent Spain, and all our other partners. I also really wanted to thank our production team, because we can't do this without them. Frank Ferrer, Ingrid Mendoza, Surel, Carlos, Alexander, Ingrid, Alejandro, Carelis, Magda, Tere, Miguel, Luis, Gise, Art. Thank you so much. And then obviously just a huge thank you to all our team, to Anna Figo for Anna Ward, and Vivian Matetis, our new Director of Strategy, for an incredible program. Jake LaFoley, Jed Higgins, for everything you see here. Dan Epstein, who's joined us as Head of Partnership, for making a lot of this possible. Nick Perloff-Giles and Thea Rosenbaum for all their help. And obviously for the leadership of John and his vision. And we're really glad to be here, and we'll be here next year. And we'll see you also in LA. And now there are some bubbles just outside there. So come and join us for a wee drink. Thank you, everyone.